The disappearance of the Sea Peoples, invaders without a name. There are moments in history when entire civilizations collapse so abruptly, so thoroughly, that even their memory shatters like glass beneath a warhammer. Around 1200 BCE, the world of the Eastern Mediterranean, brimming with mighty kingdoms, vast trading networks, gleaming palaces, and written language, was brought to its knees. Within just a few decades, empires fell, cities burned, and a silence spread like ash over once bustling lands. Historians call this event the Bronze Age collapse. But among the shattered stone and scorched papyrus, a name emerges again and again, written by trembling scribes, carved in desperation by kings, etched into the dying breath of a golden age. They were called the Sea Peoples, and then they vanished. No definitive record tells us where they came from. No surviving texts from their own hand explain who they were. No culture claims descent from them. And yet, for a brief and devastating moment, they shook the known world. This is the story of the Sea Peoples, or rather, the echo of a story, shouted across time by the ruins they left behind. The earliest warning came from Egypt, a civilization that had already stood for 2,000 years by the time these mysterious raiders arrived. Pharaoh Ramesses II, known as the Great, recorded his battles against foreign invaders on grand temple walls. Among them were the Sherden, a seafaring people he described as bold and skilled in combat. They had arrived from the north without warning, raiding the Nile Delta and threatening the heart of the kingdom. But it wasn't until the reign of his successors, particularly Ramesses III, some 50 years later, that the full storm of invasion reached Egypt's shores. In a dramatic and triumphant relief at Medinet Habu, Ramesses III depicts his victory over a massive coalition of foreign enemies, the Peliset, Cheka, Shekelesh, Danayan, and Weshesh. He writes, "No land could stand before their arms. From Hatti, Kode, Carchemish, Azawa, and Alashia, all were destroyed at once." That list is not poetic license. Those names, Hatti, Carchemish, Alashia, represented real powers. The Hittite Empire, centered in Anatolia, had ruled over much of the Near East for centuries. Now it was gone. Its capital, Hattusa, razed and abandoned. Cyprus, Alashia, was overrun. The city of Ugarit, on the coast of modern-day Syria, one of the richest trading centers of the time, sent a final letter to its overlords crying out for aid. "The enemy is approaching the city. The ships are burning. Save us." No reply ever came. The tablet was found unsent in the ruins of the royal archive. But who were these invaders, and where did they come from? Egyptian records give us only tribal or confederate names. The Peliset, who may be the ancestors of the Philistines. The Danayan, perhaps linked to the Greek Danans of Homeric fame. The Sherden, whose name bears eerie similarity to the island of Sardinia. Each group has been matched to a potential homeland, but no consensus exists. None of these identities are confirmed. The Sea Peoples arrived as a wave of destruction and left as little more than fading trails of smoke. Some scholars believe these were not simple pirates or mercenaries, but the vanguard of a full-scale migration, displaced peoples fleeing famine, climate shifts, or political upheaval. Around this same time, climate evidence shows a period of severe drought and crop failure across much of the Mediterranean. Trade routes collapsed. Food shortages erupted. Empires once thought invincible grew brittle and overextended. What happens when thousands of refugees from collapsing societies begin to move, armed, desperate, and hungry? Perhaps the Sea Peoples were less a singular army and more a maelstrom of collapsing cultures, sweeping across the coastlines in search of new homes. This might explain why they often attacked by both land and sea. The Medinet Habu reliefs depict Egyptian ships battling invaders in chaotic sea clashes, men in horned helmets, archers crouched in reed boats, swords drawn as ships burn. And still, this theory leaves unanswered the question of coordination. How did so many unrelated tribes unite in such a devastating wave? Or were they united at all? Could it be that the Sea Peoples were a name applied by their victims to a scattering of attackers, a convenient scapegoat for the end of the world as they knew it? Archaeology provides clues, but not answers. Excavations in Anatolia, Canaan, and the Aegean reveal widespread destruction layers around 1200 BCE. Palaces are burned, trade centers are looted, entire writing systems disappear. The famed Linear B script of Mycenaean Greece vanishes for centuries. In many places, urban life collapses, and survivors revert to small agrarian villages. A dark age descends over much of the region, lasting in some areas for nearly 400 years. Curiously, the destruction is not total. Egypt repelled the Sea Peoples, at least temporarily. Rameses III claims to have resettled the captured groups in fortresses along the Nile's frontier, using them as buffer populations. Some researchers believe these groups later assimilated and disappeared into the mix of Egyptian and Levantine societies. Others appear to have settled along the coast of Canaan. The Peliset, often linked with the biblical Philistines, show up in archaeological layers with foreign pottery styles, distinct architecture, and unique burial customs. Could these be the remnants of the invaders? And if so, where did the rest go? The Sea Peoples remain a riddle not just because they vanished, but because they appeared with no prologue. They left no monuments of their own, no writing, no known language, no homeland identified beyond vague guesses. Their presence is inferred entirely from the chaos they left in their wake and the cries of those they attacked. Some modern scholars push the mystery even further. They suggest that the Sea Peoples were not external invaders at all, but rebellious mercenaries. Former allies turned traitors. In this view, the empires of the Late Bronze Age collapsed under the weight of their own militarized populations. Men trained to fight were no longer paid. Soldiers became raiders. Cities once allies turned into enemies. The Sea Peoples weren't foreign. They were born from the very civilizations they destroyed. This would explain why their identities shift, why the Danaan could be linked to both Greece and Syria, why the Sherdan appear in Egyptian records as both foes and bodyguards. In a world unraveling, lines blurred, and then, just as quickly, the Sea Peoples disappeared from the record. By the time the Iron Age dawned, they were gone. Their names vanish from inscriptions. Their movements leave no trail. The lands they attacked began to rebuild, often under new systems, new rulers, new languages. The old order was dead. The world had changed. It is possible, even likely, that the Sea Peoples did not disappear at all. Rather, they were absorbed into the new civilizations they helped create. Their children may have been born in the Philistine cities of the Levant. Their traditions may echo in early Greek myths. Their weapons may lie buried beneath the ruins of once great palaces. But the name, Sea Peoples, has become a shadow on the wall of history. We don't know what they called themselves. We only know what others called them in terror, at the edge of collapse. And so, we are left with fragments, with cries for help from burning cities, with images of horned warriors etched into temple, stone, with pottery styles that change suddenly, inexplicably, with mass graves and vanished scripts. The Sea Peoples are a silence in the record, but a loud one. a silence that marks the boundary between two worlds, the Bronze Age that was and the Iron Age that would be. They are the ones who erased the past and then allowed history to begin again. What they truly wanted, where they came from, and why they vanished, remain some of the greatest unsolved questions in all of ancient history. The oracle's last breath, secrets of Delphi's prophecies. High in the jagged folds of Mount Parnassus, where pine and stone meet the sky and the air thins into something almost sacred, there once stood a sanctuary that drew kings to their knees. Not for war, not for riches, but for words, the Oracle of Delphi. For over 1,000 years, this site, modest in size but infinite in influence, was considered the very center of the world. Ancient travelers believed Delphi marked the omphalos, the navel of the earth, a place where divine voices pierced the mortal veil. Its priestess, the Pythia, was the mouthpiece of Apollo himself. Her words could ignite wars, crown emperors, or reshape the fate of nations. But who was this veiled woman, perched above a chasm in the earth? Was she truly channeling the gods, or was she part of one of history's most sophisticated political mechanisms? The mystery of Delphi is not in its stones, but in its silence. It speaks in riddles and in smoke, shrouded not by time, but by design. The Oracle of Delphi was no single person. The Pythia was a title, passed through generations of women drawn from the local population. Typically middle-aged and of modest means, she underwent ritual purification, fasting, and temple training. When it was time to speak, she would enter the Adyton, a sealed inner chamber of the Temple of Apollo, and seat herself upon a tripod throne above a natural cleft in the rock. From this sacred place, the gods were said to possess her. Ancient accounts describe the Pythia inhaling vapors from the earth and falling into a trance. Her voice would change, her body convulse. She would speak in cryptic, fragmented utterances, often incoherent, while the temple priests, known as Prophetai, stood nearby, interpreting and refining her messages into structured verses. These words, then transcribed and sent across Greece, could decide the destiny of empires. But modern historians ask a simpler question: what was she really breathing? For centuries, the idea of the Pythia inhaling any sort of vapor was dismissed by archaeologists as myth or poetic metaphor. But in the late 1990s, a geologist named Jelle de Boer and archaeologist John Hale uncovered a stunning geological truth. Two fault lines intersect directly beneath the Temple of Apollo. These faults, the Delphi and Kerner faults, allow gases to seep up from deep within the earth. Testing revealed the presence of ethylene, a sweet-smelling hydrocarbon gas that, in low concentrations, can cause euphoria, disassociation, and hallucinations. Exactly the symptoms described by ancient writers. A naturally occurring inhalant from the bowels of the earth in just the right quantities to induce trance-like behavior. In other words, the Pythia may well have been speaking under the influence, not of Apollo, but of the Earth's chemistry. Yet, this only deepens the mystery, because if the oracle's powers came not from divine inspiration, but from geology, then who first chose this very specific, isolated crack in the mountain as a place of prophecy? How did the early temple builders know that here, and only here, the earth itself spoke through vapor? Was it accidental, intuitive, or had the region already been associated with strange natural phenomena? And if the priestess was entranced, who shaped her visions into policy? The role of the priests at Delphi has received far less attention than the Pythia herself, yet they may have held the true levers of influence. These were educated men, fluent in diplomacy, theology, and regional politics. They controlled temple finances, maintained relationships with visiting dignitaries, and preserved oracular archives. Most importantly, they were the interpreters of the Pythia's utterances. When a king asked whether he should invade a neighboring land, the answer returned might be as enigmatic as, "You will go forth, and a great kingdom will fall." But whose kingdom? The enemy's, or your own? This strategic ambiguity ensured that Delphi's prophecies were always correct, regardless of the outcome. But it also allowed room for manipulation. The line between interpretation and invention is thin, especially when the words come from a trance. Could it be that Delphi's oracles were not merely mystical, but engineered? Was the Pythia a theatrical centerpiece in a masterclass of information control? Delphi was not just a religious center, it was internationally political. Every major Greek city-state contributed offerings to the temple. These ranged from humble bowls to towering statues and entire treasuries. The Athenian treasury, for example, was a fully enclosed marble building filled with precious gifts to honor Apollo. Corinth, Thebes, Sparta, all gave generously, not just for favor, but for presence. To be visible at Delphi was to signal one's importance in the Hellenic world, and with visibility came influence. Over time, Delphi became a sort of neutral zone for diplomacy. Treaties were signed there, disputes arbitrated, wars delayed or launched based on a single sentence from the Pythia. If one were to seek control over the Greek world without an army, Delphi was the perfect throne. One of the most telling or chilling examples of Delphi's power comes from the story of Croesus, king of Lydia. Around 560 BCE, Croesus, famed for his unimaginable wealth, sought to determine which oracle in the ancient world was most accurate. To test them, he devised a clever trick. He sent envoys to each oracle across the region, instructing them to ask the same question at a prearranged time. What is Croesus doing at this very moment? Only Delphi succeeded. The Pythia responded, "I count the sands and measure the sea. I understand the silent and hear the deaf. The smell has come to my senses of a hard-shelled tortoise being boiled in a bronze cauldron with lamb's flesh. Bronze above, bronze below." Croesus, stunned, had in fact been cooking that exact meal in a bronze pot at the exact time. Delphi had passed the test. He later returned to ask whether he should attack the rising power of Persia. The Pythia's reply, "If you cross the Halys River, a great empire will fall." Taking this as confirmation, Croesus attacked and was decisively defeated. The empire that fell was his own. This is the genius of Delphi. Truth wrapped in riddle. Prophecy cloaked in plausible deniability. But Delphi was not eternal. Over the centuries, its influence waned. The classical world changed. Alexander the Great famously seized the Pythia by the arm and demanded a prophecy on his own terms. Later, Roman emperors treated the oracle with a mix of reverence and skepticism. The temple was plundered more than once. Earthquakes damaged its foundation. By the time of the Christianization of the Roman Empire, Delphi had lost its authority. In 393 CE, Emperor Theodosius III outlawed pagan practices. The last known oracle was silenced. Yet questions remain. If Delphi's prophetic power came from natural gas emissions, why has the site remained dormant for so long? Are the faults inactive? Did a change in geology seal the source forever? Or did the power of belief, the collective will of a people, vanish, taking the phenomenon with it? Equally curious is the intentional architecture of the site. Everything in Delphi was arranged with symbolic precision. The Temple of Apollo faced east toward the rising sun. The Castalian spring, where the Pythia bathed, was said to grant purification. The Sibyl Rock, just outside the temple, was where the earliest oracles delivered pronouncements even before the stone foundations were laid. These were not casual placements. They were ritual choreography, tuned to mythology, celestial cycles, and symbolic geography. Someone designed Delphi as a machine of reverence and as a stage for performance. So what was the oracle, truly? Was she a drugged woman inhaling vapors and mumbling nonsense? A tool of highly skilled priests manipulating regional politics through ambiguous phrases? A vessel for something divine, or a symbol of the power humans grant to symbols? Even now, modern science confirms what the ancients knew but could never explain. Certain places feel different. Certain voices resonate. The natural world conspires with myth to create wonder. And sometimes, when all the right ingredients align, stone, smoke, silence, and belief, a single woman's voice can echo for 1,000 years. The mystery of Delphi is not that we no longer hear the gods. It is that we still don't know who was truly speaking. The Labyrinth of Knossos. Was there ever a Minotaur? Beneath the burning Cretan sun, amid the ruins of olive groves and broken columns, lies a place once so sophisticated, so elegant, and so utterly strange that when the first archaeologists uncovered it, they believed they had stepped into myth. Its corridors twist and turn. Its walls are painted with dolphins, priestesses, and ceremonial bulls. Its architecture suggests an intricate and harmonious civilization, but its legends speak of darkness, a child-devouring monster, a cruel king, a maze so complex, no man could escape. This is Knossos, the heart of the Minoan civilization, and perhaps the source of one of the most enduring stories in Western mythology, the Labyrinth and the Minotaur. The question that echoes through the ruins today is not whether the myth is real, but whether the reality that inspired it might be stranger still. The myth begins with a king, Minos, ruler of Crete. Desiring a sign from the gods to legitimize his reign, he asked the sea god Poseidon to send him a divine bull. Minos promised to sacrifice it. But when the magnificent animal emerged from the waves, Minos could not bear to part with it. In anger, Poseidon cursed Minos' wife, Pasiphae, to fall in love with the bull. From this unnatural union came a creature, neither man nor beast, a Minotaur, monstrous and devouring. To contain the abomination, Minos ordered the construction of a labyrinth so intricate no one could escape. There, the Minotaur was kept, and every 9 years, 7 Athenian youths and 7 maidens were sent into the maze as tribute and as food. The hero Theseus eventually entered the labyrinth, slew the beast, and found his way out using a simple thread, guided by Minos' daughter Ariadne. Myth? Certainly. But is there something more beneath the surface? In 1900, British archaeologist Sir Arthur Evans began excavating the ruins at Knossos. What he found shocked the world. A vast, multi-story complex containing hundreds of interconnected rooms, ceremonial halls, storage vaults, staircases, courtyards, and hidden chambers emerged from the soil. This was no mere palace. It was a palatial city with running water, indoor plumbing, grand frescoes, and complex architectural features designed not for war, but for ritual and elegance. Evans called it the Palace of Minos. The resemblance to a labyrinth was undeniable. Winding corridors connected storerooms filled with massive clay vessels. Hidden doorways and staircases led to new levels. The layout was intentionally complex, not symmetrical or easily navigated. Some rooms were ceremonial, others mysterious. One fresco depicts young men and women vaulting over bulls in a form of athletic or ritual sport known as bull leaping. Evans was convinced this was the seed of the Minotaur legend. The palace was the labyrinth. The rituals with bulls inspired the myth of a monster, and the culture that created it, so alien in its femininity, peace and artistry, became transformed into legend by later, more warlike civilizations. But is that explanation too convenient? First, the name Minotaur means bull of Minos, a creature named after the king. But there is no evidence in Minoan records of any figure named Minos. In fact, the Minoans left behind no deciphered writing that tells their own version of events. Their primary script, Linear A, remains undeciphered to this day. We don't know what they called themselves. We don't know their myths, their gods, or their internal political systems. What we do know comes from later Greek sources, written centuries after the Minoan civilization had already collapsed. So whose story is this? Second, the Minoans were not a warrior people. Their art lacks images of conquest or battle. Their cities have no defensive walls. Their power appears to have come from trade, maritime skill, and perhaps ritual centralization. Yet their civilization vanished suddenly around 1450 BCE. The cities were burned, the palaces abandoned. Was there a violent end? A volcanic cataclysm? Or something internal? Something hidden in the very halls of Knossos? The eruption of Thera, now the island of Santorini, is often cited as a catastrophic event that contributed to the Minoan collapse. Around 1600 BCE, a massive volcanic explosion tore apart the island, sending tsunamis crashing toward Crete and blanketing the atmosphere in ash. Some believe this event destabilized the Minoans, both environmentally and spiritually. Interestingly, the Thera eruption may also be connected to the origin of Atlantis myths, but that's another story. Knossos survived the eruption, but not unscathed. Archaeological evidence suggests the palace was rebuilt afterward, yet only to burn again roughly 150 years later. After that, it was never reoccupied in its original glory. Who burned it? Some scholars believe the Mycenaeans, the warrior civilization from mainland Greece, invaded and overtook the island, imposing their language, Linear B, which has been deciphered, and reshaping Cretan society. In this version, the peaceful Minoans fell to militarized Greeks. The myth of Theseus slaying the Minotaur may then represent more than a hero's tale. It could be a political allegory, justifying Athens' superiority over Crete. In slaying the monster of Knossos, the myth celebrates the end of Minoan dominance and the rise of the Greek mainland. But there's a strange contradiction. Why depict the monster as half man, half bull, and why locate it in a maze, rather than just a dungeon? The very motifs of the Minotaur myth are unusually precise for a symbolic retelling. Could they reflect a distorted memory of real ritual practices? Let us look again at bull leaping. Depicted prominently in Minoan art, this activity involved acrobats, both male and female, vaulting over live bulls, grabbing their horns, flipping over their backs, and landing behind them. The bulls were sacred animals in Minoan religion, associated with strength, virility, and perhaps the sun. But some scholars, such as Marinatos and Rehak, have suggested that these were not mere sports, but highly symbolic and possibly dangerous rituals. Injuries or deaths may have occurred, and like in other ancient cultures, the line between performance and sacrifice was thin. Could young Athenians have truly been sent to Crete, not as tribute to a monster, but to participate in religious rites that involved facing bulls and possibly dying? To outsiders, such a ceremony, witnessed once and retold many times, could evolve into the legend of a sacrificial maze and a man-eating beast, especially if those ceremonies ended in blood. And what of the labyrinth itself? The word comes from labrys, the double-headed axe used in Minoan religious iconography. These axes, often associated with female priestesses and fertility rituals, were sacred objects. The term labyrinth could mean the house of the labrys, the ceremonial center of Minoan spirituality. If so, the labyrinth wasn't a prison, it was a temple. But temples have gods, and the Minoans, it seems, had a particularly complex relationship with the divine. Frescoes show women in positions of power, possibly as priestesses or even queens. Snakes, bulls, birds, and the crescent moon appear again and again. There is no single ruling god, as in later Olympian myths, but a pantheon of forces, often feminine and cyclical. Could the myth of the Minotaur represent not just a distortion, but a demonization of Minoan faith? To later Greeks, steeped in patriarchal Olympian religion, the rituals of the Minoans may have seemed dark, foreign, even monstrous. And so, the sacred bull, once a divine symbol, became a monster. The labrys became a prison. The priestess became a cursed queen. There is one final, haunting detail. Some areas of the Knossos complex appear deliberately disorienting. Staircases lead to nowhere. Rooms have no apparent function. Corridors loop back. Light wells confuse. Spatial perception. The palace was not just complex, it was experiential, designed not just to house people, but to transform those who walked its paths. Architects call this kind of layout ritual space, a place meant to shape consciousness through movement, light, and sound. Walking through Knossos might have felt like entering another world, a sacred world, or a terrifying one. Today, as tourists wander through the partially reconstructed ruins, guided by signs and brochures, the ancient energy remains elusive. But, under the sun-baked stones, the questions still pulse. What happened inside those rooms? What ceremonies were performed? What stories were born from fear or from reverence? Was there ever truly a Minotaur? Or was the Minotaur the mask we placed upon a culture we never truly understood? The story of Knossos is not just the story of a myth. It is the story of a civilization that left no voice behind, and yet speaks, across time, through architecture, ritual, and legend. A culture so advanced, so unlike its neighbors, that it had to be reduced to monsters and mazes just to make sense. The labyrinth is not a place. It is a metaphor for history itself, full of turns, shadows, false exits, and the silent presence of something ancient, waiting to be understood. Göbekli Tepe, the temple that shouldn't exist. In the arid highlands of southeastern Turkey, where the horizon rolls with sun-bleached hills and the soil is thick with the memory of ancient footsteps, there lies a place that rewrites everything. We thought we knew about the origins of civilization. It isn't made of gold. There are no inscriptions, no statues of kings, no relics of empires. What was found there was older, stranger, and impossible. Göbekli Tepe, a name that, until the 1990s, meant little more than Potbelly Hill to the villagers who lived nearby, is now considered, by many archaeologists, the oldest known monumental structure ever built by human hands. Dated to around 9600 BCE, Göbekli Tepe predates the Egyptian pyramids by 7,000 years. It predates Stonehenge by 6,000. It even predates the invention of the wheel, agriculture, pottery, and writing. It was built somehow by hunter-gatherers, and then, most mysteriously, it was buried on purpose. The site was first noted by surveyors in the 1960s, but dismissed as nothing more than a medieval cemetery. It wasn't until 1994, when German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt took a closer look, that the truth began to reveal itself. Beneath the hill, Schmidt and his team discovered a series of massive stone circles, each made up of towering T-shaped pillars, some over 16 feet tall and weighing up to 20 tons. These stones were not just arranged with purpose, they were carved with exquisite images. Lions, vultures, boars, snakes, scorpions, and headless humans. The carvings are deeply symbolic. They're not random, and they suggest a belief system, perhaps even a cosmology, older than any known religious text. This raised a question so radical it shook the foundations of archaeology. What if religion came before farming? Until Göbekli Tepe, the dominant theory of human development was this. Agriculture led to settlements, which led to cities, which led to complex societies, and only then did monumental architecture, like temples, emerge as a reflection of organized civilization. But Göbekli Tepe turns that logic on its head. There is no evidence of farming at the site during its earliest phase, no signs of permanent dwellings. The builders appear to have been mobile foragers, bands of hunter-gatherers. Yet they came together to build a sacred site of unimaginable complexity, requiring coordinated labor, advanced planning, and abstract vision. In other words, spiritual belief may have been the cause, not the result, of civilization. They didn't build temples because they had cities. They built cities because they had temples. But how? How could nomadic tribes, armed with only stone tools, cut and transport 20-ton limestone pillars? How did they organize construction with no permanent leadership structures, no bureaucracy, no known script? There are no wheel tracks, no beasts of burden, no copper or bronze tools. Yet the precision of the cuts, the smoothness of the reliefs, and the sheer volume of stone suggest generations of planning and labor. Moreover, the alignment of the circles is not random. Some researchers argue the pillars align with celestial bodies, such as the star Sirius or solstice positions, indicating an early form of astronomy. Others suggest the stone animals represent a zodiac, or even a calendar system. One carving in particular, the so-called vulture stone, has been interpreted by some as a map of the skies around 10,950 BCE, possibly referencing a cosmic event, such as a meteor impact. But here we drift into theory. What is certain is this. The builders of Göbekli Tepe were not simple foragers. They had vision, coordination, and faith in something unseen. Then, around 8000 BCE, something even stranger happened. The site was not destroyed by an enemy. It wasn't abandoned in haste. It was deliberately buried. Stone circles were filled in with dirt, bones, flint tools, and debris, layered with care, as if in ritual. The effort to bury Göbekli Tepe was as great as the effort to build it. Why? Was it shame? Fear? A change in belief? Or an ending so significant that the site had to be sealed for eternity? One theory is that as agriculture developed, perhaps nearby in the Fertile Crescent, new values emerged. Settlements formed, hierarchies rose, and the ancient cultic center no longer aligned with the beliefs of the new world. Another theory suggests a shift in climate. Around this period, the last ice age was ending. Rising temperatures changed migration patterns, crop availability, and even the distribution of wild game. Perhaps the sacred rituals of Göbekli Tepe could no longer sustain its followers. Or perhaps the act of burial was itself a ritual, not the erasure of something, but its completion. Klaus Schmidt believed that Göbekli Tepe functioned as a central, ritual gathering site for mobile groups across a wide region. Not a city, not a fortress, but a spiritual heart, a place where myths were made, seasons marked, and the dead honored. And that raises another mystery. No human remains have been found, buried within the stone circles. Yet the carvings suggest a connection to death and the afterlife. Images of decapitated figures, vultures lifting souls to the sky, and scenes of transformation abound. Is it possible that this was a temple of the dead? A necropolis in spirit, if not in body? Or was it a site of initiation, a sacred school where the mysteries of the cosmos were taught in stone? The truth remains elusive. Even the purpose of the T-shaped pillars, often arranged in pairs, with two central megaliths surrounded by a ring of others, defies consensus. Some believe they represent anthropomorphic deities. Others argue they were meant as cosmic markers, representing dualities like life and death, sky and earth, predator and prey. We simply do not know. And that is perhaps the most haunting truth of all. Göbekli Tepe was built by a people we cannot name, for a purpose we cannot confirm, in a language we cannot read, and with technology we do not understand. Their civilization left no cities, no literature, no oral traditions that survived. When they buried their temple, they buried themselves. From history, from memory, and from identity. Everything we know is inferred from stone and silence. And yet, this silence speaks volumes. It tells us that the story of humanity is older, stranger, and more spiritual than we ever imagined. That the first spark of civilization may not have been fire or food, but faith. That the first monument built by mankind was not a palace or a tomb, but an altar. Today, Göbekli Tepe is still being excavated. Less than 10% of the site has been uncovered. Dozens of other mounds in the region, still untouched, may belong to the same cultural horizon. They could contain more temples, more secrets, perhaps even texts. If Göbekli Tepe is the tip of the iceberg, what lies beneath could rewrite our understanding of prehistory forever. But even if no more is found, the implications are clear. Our ancestors were not as primitive as we thought, and civilization did not begin with tools, but with meaning. A meaning carved into stone, before language, before kings, before time. A mystery still rising from the dust, asking us to reconsider what it truly means to be human. The vanished people of Teotihuacan. Just outside the bustling sprawl of modern-day Mexico City stands a place so ancient, so immense, and so mysteriously abandoned that even the Aztecs, who arrived 1,000 years after its fall, whispered about it with reverence. They called it Teotihuacan, the place where gods were born. But Teotihuacan was no myth. It was real. At its peak, around 500 CE, it was the sixth largest city in the world, with a population estimated at over 100,000. Its grand central avenue stretched over 2 miles. Its pyramids rivaled those of Egypt in scale. Its urban planning, aligned with the cosmos, was meticulous, massive, and unprecedented in the ancient Americas. Yet we do not know what the people who built Teotihuacan called themselves. We do not know their language. We do not know their kings. We do not know why they vanished. The greatest city in ancient Mesoamerica left no known writing, no chronicles, no clear clues. It rose out of nowhere and disappeared just as suddenly, swallowed by time, still echoing with unanswered questions. When the Aztecs encountered Teotihuacan in the 14th century, the city was already in ruins. Vegetation had begun to claim its plazas. Earth had begun to bury its temples. But the scale was undeniable. They believed the city had been built by giants or gods, a sacred place where the sun and moon were created, and where the boundary between the earthly and the divine was thin. Even today, the feeling is hard to ignore. Stand at the foot of the Pyramid of the Sun, and you stand before a structure 216 feet tall, constructed from millions of tons of volcanic stone, without wheels, pack animals, or iron tools. Climb its terraces and gaze down the Avenue of the Dead, flanked by countless platforms, temples, and courtyards, all aligned with extraordinary precision. Tilted 15.5 degrees east of true north to match astronomical phenomena, and yet we don't know who designed it or why. Teotihuacan is unlike any other Mesoamerican city. It is not Mayan, though it influenced the Maya profoundly. It is not Aztec, though the Aztecs claimed cultural inheritance from it. Its art is geometric, abstract, often impersonal. No glorified kings, no towering statues of rulers, no written stelae proclaiming battles or dynasties. The murals that survive depict symbolic creatures, jaguars, owls, serpents, and sometimes entire deities, but rarely human individuality. This suggests a culture that valued collective identity over hierarchy, a rare trait in ancient empires. But it may also explain why, when Teotihuacan fell, it left so little trace of who had ruled. Archaeologists have uncovered districts within the city divided by function and ethnicity, indicating a multi-ethnic metropolis, home to people from across Mesoamerica. There were neighborhoods of Zapotecs, Maya, Mixtecs, and others. There were industrial zones, obsidian workshops that produced blades and tools with almost surgical precision. Residential compounds housed families of artisans, merchants, and priests. A canal system carried water. Roads stretched for miles in cardinal directions. This was not a loosely connected village. It was a planned urban complex, engineered for order. And then, suddenly around 550 CE, something happened. Fires swept through the ceremonial core. Murals were defaced, statues destroyed, elite compounds looted. But curiously, the rest of the city, the working-class districts, were left untouched. This was not a foreign invasion. This was an internal uprising. So what sparked the collapse? Theories abound. A few of the most credible: social revolt. The destruction focused heavily on temples and elite structures. Some believe a popular rebellion overthrew a ruling class that had grown too powerful or too disconnected from the population. Environmental stress, tree ring data, and lake sediment samples suggest a prolonged drought around the time of collapse. Crop failures, famine, and social unrest may have ignited the revolution. Religious upheaval. Teotihuacan was deeply spiritual. Its largest pyramids, the Pyramid of the Sun and Pyramid of the Moon, were likely aligned to celestial events. A dramatic shift in religious ideology, or the fall of priestly authority, could have shattered its ideological foundations. Political fragmentation. With no central dynastic record, it's possible that Teotihuacan was a coalition of factions that eventually fractured and turned on each other. None of these answers are complete. None explain how a city so mighty could be reduced to ruins, forgotten within a few generations, and replaced by nothing of comparable scale for centuries. And then there is the matter of the tunnels. In recent years, ground-penetrating radar and careful excavations beneath the Temple of the Feathered Serpent, also known as the Temple of Quetzalcoatl, revealed a man-made tunnel over 300 feet long, descending deep beneath the pyramid. Inside were hundreds of ritual objects, jade statues, obsidian mirrors, conch shells, rubber balls, even liquid mercury. Its presence, baffling to archaeologists, may have symbolized a river to the underworld, a pathway for gods or the dead. In many Mesoamerican cultures, liquid mercury was associated with divine power, death, and the stars. Was the tunnel a tomb, a chamber for initiation, or something darker? The team has not yet reached the deepest end, which may contain a sealed crypt, perhaps the burial of a god-king, or the final answer to who ruled Teotihuacan. For now, the mystery remains literally buried. Teotihuacan's cultural influence didn't end with its collapse. Its architectural style, urban grid, and religious iconography spread across the region. The Maya adopted elements of its iconography, and some Maya rulers even traveled to Teotihuacan to establish alliances or legitimacy. The Aztecs revered the site centuries later, even incorporating elements of Teotihuacan mythology into their own creation stories. And yet the city's founders, language, and belief system remain unknown. Was Teotihuacan ruled by a single dynasty or a priestly council? Was it a theocracy, a merchant republic, or a federation? Was its rise a local miracle, or the product of an earlier, hidden civilization? We may never know. What makes Teotihuacan more haunting than most ancient mysteries is not just its silence, but its sheer scale. It wasn't a lost village swallowed by forest. It was a megacity, place of light and stone and spirit that rivaled Rome in population and size, yet left no voice behind. We can touch its walls, walk its roads, climb its pyramids, but we cannot name its kings, sing its songs, or read its thoughts. It is a ghost city, preserved in stone, whispering through wind and ruin, and until we unlock its final chamber, its greatest truths remain entombed not in earth, but in absence. The Nazca lines, messages for the sky gods? Across the parched plains of southern Peru, where the sun blazes mercilessly and rain falls only a few times a year, there exists an ancient riddle scratched into the earth itself. These are not marks, made in haste, nor random scars of erosion. They are lines, long, straight, deliberate. They stretch for miles across the desert floor, intersecting, looping, diverging. But then something stranger happens. The lines form images, not crude sketches, but precise, graceful geoglyphs. A monkey with a curling tail, a hummingbird with a blade-thin beak, a spider, a whale, even a figure known as the astronaut, a humanoid with an oversized head waving toward the sky. This is Nazca, first spotted by pilots in the 1920s. The Nazca lines have since become one of the most enigmatic archaeological wonders in the world. Over 800 straight lines, 300 geometric figures, and more than 70 biomorphic designs, many of them visible only from the air. Who made them? Why? And how? These questions have puzzled scientists, mystics, and skywatchers alike, because even with decades of study, the Nazca lines refuse to give up their secrets. The Nazca people flourished between 200 BCE and 600 CE. They lived in small villages along rivers cutting through the harsh desert, surviving on a fragile balance of agriculture and seasonal rainfall. Despite these challenges, they developed a distinctive style of pottery, textile weaving, and underground aqueducts called puquios, which still function today. But no construction, not in Peru or anywhere else in pre-Columbian America, compares to what they left in the Pampa. The scale is staggering. The longest straight lines stretch over 10 miles. The largest figures, such as the heron and the lizard, measure over 1,000 feet, and the images were made by a deceptively simple technique. Workers removed the reddish-brown stones on the surface to reveal the lighter-colored soil beneath. There is no evidence of heavy machinery, no chariots, no animals used to haul materials. And yet, the lines are straight and vast, achieved only through some form of advanced surveying or coordination. Even more mystifying, many of the figures are best appreciated only from high above, from a perspective impossible for the Nazca to reach without flight. So how did they make them? And more importantly, why? The first serious attempt to interpret the Nazca lines came from Maria Reicher, a German mathematician and archaeologist who dedicated her life to studying the desert drawings. Reicher believed the lines were a celestial calendar, pointing to solstices, equinoxes, and the rising or setting of specific stars. She noted that several lines aligned with astronomical events, the sunrise on the winter solstice, or the southernmost position of the moon. She spent over 40 years mapping, measuring, and preserving the lines, often alone, with only a broom and a measuring tape in hand. Reicher's theory that the lines were part of an early observatory still holds weight. Many scholars agree that the Nazca had a sophisticated understanding of the night sky. But this explanation does not fully account for the zoomorphic figures, the spider, monkey, dog, or condor. These are not functional lines for astronomical sighting. They are ritual images, crafted with precision and symmetry. Could they be offerings to the gods? The Nazca lived in a desert where survival was tenuous. The Andean deities were often associated with water, fertility, and celestial bodies. Some experts suggest that the geoglyphs were designed as ritual pathways, meant to be walked in procession, danced upon, or used in ceremonies meant to invoke rain or agricultural blessings. The monkey and spider may symbolize rainforest animals, a distant land where water was abundant, thus invoking the spirit of water through animal imagery. Another theory centers on pilgrimage. The lines may have formed routes leading to sacred sites or served as maps of ceremonial territory. In this view, the desert floor became a sacred canvas, walked upon by priesthoods enacting mythic journeys or agricultural cycles. Still others argue that the lines are messages to the gods, giant prayer symbols meant to be seen from the heavens. The figures, then, are not for human eyes, but divine ones. If true, the very scale of the drawings takes on new meaning. They were not created for the earthbound, but for beings who dwell in the sky. This interpretation fuels one of the most controversial and widely publicized theories about Nazca, that the lines are evidence of ancient contact with extraterrestrials. Popularized by Erich von Däniken in the 1960s, the theory suggests that the massive geoglyphs served as landing strips or navigation markers for alien visitors. The astronaut figure, with its oversized eyes and helmet-like head, is often cited as proof of alien presence in antiquity. Other shapes, such as the trapezoids and massive straight lines, are compared to runways or signals. Mainstream archaeologists reject this theory. There is no physical evidence, no artifacts, no inscriptions, no records linking Nazca to anything beyond the human. But the popularity of the idea points to something deeper, the profound alienness of the Nazca lines even to our modern eyes. They do not resemble anything we expect from ancient desert societies. Their purpose remains opaque. Their creators are nearly silent. And so, into that vacuum, the imagination rushes in. Scientific study continues, using satellite imagery, drone, mapping, and LiDAR technology, researchers are still discovering new geoglyphs, some of them obscured by erosion or only visible through digital enhancement. In 2020, artificial intelligence analysis led to the identification of over 140 new figures, many smaller and simpler than the more famous ones, but still distinct in form. Birds, fish, snakes, and humans in action. What emerges is a picture not of a single massive project, but of generations of activity, families, communities, perhaps priesthoods, adding to the sacred landscape over centuries. It was not one message, but many. So who were the Nazca? Their culture eventually declined around 600 CE, perhaps due to prolonged droughts or changing climate. As their irrigation systems failed, their ability to maintain settlements collapsed, but they did not disappear. Later cultures, like the Wari, and eventually the Inca, absorbed and inherited aspects of Nazca tradition. And the lines, despite their creators vanishing, remained. Preserved by the dry desert air and the rarity of rainfall, they survived the centuries untouched. Today, they are protected as a UNESCO World Heritage Site and monitored by satellite to prevent encroachment or damage. But we are no closer to a definitive answer than when the first pilot looked down and gasped at a giant monkey drawn in the sand. The Nazca lines continue to resist easy categorization. They are not temples, not homes, not defensive structures. They are art without an audience, symbols without a script, purpose without proof. And yet, they are profoundly human. In them, we see the age-old urge to connect with something greater, to speak across vast distances, to gods, to stars, to the unknown. Whether they were made for divine eyes or cosmic visitors, for water spirits or wandering souls, the Nazca lines remain a message, from earth to sky, from the past to the future, from the forgotten to the ever-curious, the lost army of Cambyses, 50,000 men swallowed by sand. In the heart of Egypt's western desert lies a place so vast, so dry, and so hostile to life that even the pharaohs called it cursed. Known today as the Great Sand Sea, this desolate expanse between the modern oasis towns of Farafra and Siwa is an endless ocean of dunes and rock formations, where the wind whispers like ghosts and the sun bakes the bones of the earth. It was here, according to ancient legend, that an entire army vanished. Not a patrol, not a caravan, but 50,000 men, armed and marching in formation, gone without a trace. This is the story of Cambyses II, king of Persia, son of Cyrus the Great, and the mysterious fate of the expedition he sent into the desert in 525 BCE, a tale of imperial ambition, divine wrath, and perhaps the greatest unsolved military disappearance in ancient history. The account comes to us from Herodotus, the Greek historian often called the father of history, and occasionally the father of lies. Writing about a century after the event, Herodotus tells of Cambyses' conquest of Egypt, which was successful, and then of 3 additional campaigns the Persian king planned from there against Carthage, which he aborted due to the refusal of Phoenician sailors, against the Ammonians, the inhabitants of the famous Oracle of Amun at Siwa Oasis, against Ethiopia, a failed campaign that resulted in disaster. But it is the second mission that captures the imagination. Herodotus writes that Cambyses sent 50,000 soldiers from Thebes to Siwa, a distant oasis temple deep in the Libyan desert. Their goal, to punish the Oracle of Amun which had refused to recognize Cambyses as a legitimate ruler of Egypt. The men marched west, provisioning for a long desert journey. They reached the oasis of Karga, where they rested. Then they struck out into the sands. They were never seen again. Herodotus writes, "They set out from Thebes and reached the city of Oasis. From there, when they had set out across the desert, a southerly wind rose in force and buried them under a mass of sand. A sandstorm," Herodotus claims, "a powerful, unrelenting Damascene wind, common in the region even today, sweeping dunes like waves across the desert, choking and swallowing everything in its path. No bodies, no weapons, no armor, just silence. For over 2,000 years, that silence persisted. No ancient sources contradicted Herodotus, but none corroborated him either. Some scholars dismissed the tale as myth, an allegory of divine punishment for hubris. Others believed it had a kernel of truth, perhaps exaggerated. Then, in the late 20th and early 21st centuries, a series of expeditions sought to uncover the truth, and the desert began to whisper again. In the 1990s and 2000s, twin Italian brothers and adventurers, Angelo and Alfredo Castiglione, claim to have discovered compelling evidence of the lost army in the Egyptian desert near the Gilf Kebir plateau, hundreds of kilometers from Siwa. Among the findings, bronze weapons, a Persian-style arrowhead, remnants of horse harnesses, a silver bracelet, and even fragments of human bones, partially fossilized in ancient sand. They believe these discoveries mark the true path the army took, a more southerly route than Herodotus suggested. Based on satellite imaging and wind pattern analysis, they posited that the army may have veered off course or attempted to flank the desert from a different direction. Yet Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities remained cautious. The evidence, they argued, was suggestive, but not definitive. The desert hides many secrets. A few arrowheads do not an army make. But the discovery reignited interest in the mystery. Could the tale be true after all? The Siwa oasis itself offers further intrigue. Nestled deep in the Libyan desert, it remains isolated even today. In ancient times, it was the seat of the Oracle of Amun, one of the most revered oracles in the ancient world. So powerful was its influence that even Alexander the Great journeyed there in 331 BCE across hundreds of miles of sand to seek its blessing. According to legend, the oracle greeted him not as a conqueror, but as a son of Zeus Ammon, confirming his divine status. If Cambyses had succeeded in destroying the oracle, history might have looked very different. But perhaps it was not mere sand that defeated him. Alternative theories have emerged. Some suggest the army perished not from a sandstorm, but from logistical failure. The desert's vast distances, unpredictable winds, and scarce water could have stranded them far from help. Without access to the ancient underground water channels that sustained desert travel, many of which were known only to local Berbers, the soldiers may have simply died of thirst, scattered across dunes where the wind erased their traces. Others propose a military ambush. At the time, Egypt was far from pacified. Rebel factions and Libyan tribes hostile to Persian rule may have ambushed the column during a vulnerable moment. If the army was split up, disoriented, and attacked in terrain they could not navigate, they might have perished without a full-scale battle. Still others speculate the mission never happened at all, that Herodotus, relying on oral reports and hearsay, embroidered a story to match the grandeur of Cambyses' failure in Ethiopia. But then, why the persistent local legends? To this day, Bedouin and Berber communities in the Siwa region speak of a ghost army swallowed by the sands. They warn travelers of cursed dunes and shifting trails. Some even point to ancient burial mounds said to contain the bones of soldiers long forgotten. Could oral memory outlive written history? The Egyptian desert has long held a reputation for supernatural phenomena. The singing sand dunes, created by dry, cascading grains, emit low, droning hums that can sound like voices. Mirages deceive the eye. Magnetic anomalies distort compasses. In some stretches, no birds fly, no plants grow. The silence is absolute. In this landscape, a sandstorm capable of burying 50,000 men is not unthinkable. What is unthinkable is that no trace, no mass grave, no armor cache, no equipment depot has ever been definitively found. But perhaps that is exactly the point. The sand not only destroys, it erases. Today, with advanced satellite imaging, thermal detection, and underground radar, we are better equipped than ever to uncover what lies beneath the dunes. And yet, despite years of scanning, the mass remains elusive. It is possible that the truth lies in a narrow corridor of time and space, a precise wind direction, a collapse of morale, an unexpected shift in terrain. In the desert, even one wrong day's decision can seal an entire army's fate, and perhaps that's why the story lingers. Because it isn't just about Cambyses' men. It is about the fragility of power in the face of nature, about the arrogance of kings who challenge gods, and about how sometimes the earth does not answer with battle, but with silence. Herodotus may not have gotten every detail right, but even now, the idea of an army erased by a sandstorm feels plausible, even terrifying. It reminds us that history is not always written by victors. Sometimes it is swallowed whole by time, by weather, by the vast unyielding breath of the desert. The Mohenjo-Daro meltdown, apocalypse in the Indus Valley. On the arid plains of what is now southern Pakistan, beneath layers of dust and time, rests the skeleton of a city so advanced, so meticulously organized, and so abruptly abandoned that, even today, it defies historical classification. Its name is Mohenjo-Daro, meaning Mound of the Dead in Sindhi, a name given long after the city fell silent. This was once one of the most sophisticated urban centers of the ancient world. Around 2600 BCE, it thrived as part of the Indus Valley civilization, a vast, sprawling network of cities, towns, and trade routes that stretched across what is now Pakistan and northwest India. And then, around 1900 BCE, it disappeared. No record of invasion, no great fire, no epic battle, just ruins, streets emptied, workshops abandoned, bodies unburied. Mohenjo-Daro was not destroyed in the way other ancient cities were. It was left behind, eerily intact. What happened to this place? Why did a city so advanced collapse without a trace? The Indus Valley civilization, also known as the Harappan civilization, is one of the least understood of the great ancient societies. Unlike Egypt or Mesopotamia, its cities left behind no deciphered texts, no royal decrees, no temple hymns, no battle records. What it did leave was infrastructure. Cities like Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa were laid out in gridded street plans with remarkable uniformity. They featured multi-story houses, drainage systems, flush toilets, and bathing complexes. Public granaries and standardized weights suggest a centralized economy. Even more curious, there is no evidence of palaces, temples, or kings. No grand statues glorifying rulers. No military fortifications. This suggests a society built on civic cooperation, trade, and urban planning rather than warfare or theocratic rule. It was in many ways utopian, and then it ended. Mohenjo-Daro was first excavated in the 1920s by British archaeologist John Marshall, who quickly realized the site's importance. Streets paved with fired brick, wells in every home, a great bath in the city's center, likely used for ritual purification. But what Marshall and his team found beneath the surface unsettled them. Dozens of skeletons lying in strange positions, curled in corners, face down in the streets, arms flung over their heads. These were not typical burials. They were not buried at all. Some researchers speculated these people died suddenly, as if struck by disaster. But no massive flood layer, no signs of mass violence, no defensive wounds or smashed buildings. It was as if the city had been frozen mid-breath. One of the most controversial theories to emerge came in the 1970s, when David Davenport, an Italian researcher, claimed that Mohenjo-Daro bore signs of a nuclear explosion. He cited the following anomalies: areas of intense heat vitrification, where bricks had been fused together, unusual levels of radioactivity found in the soil and skeletons, bodies found lying in the street as if felled by a blast wave, a sudden and unexplained end to urban activity. The idea that a nuclear event in ancient times could have wiped out the city was met with immediate skepticism. No radioactive isotopes consistent with atomic blasts were confirmed. No crater, no melted metals. Most archaeologists reject the theory entirely, and yet the signs of extreme heat remain unexplained. In some zones of the site, bricks appear burned at temperatures far exceeding what ancient kilns could produce. So if it wasn't nuclear, what was it? More grounded theories propose natural disasters. Mohenjo-Daro was located near the Indus River, and while there is no overwhelming flood layer at the final occupation level, the city may have suffered from repeated flooding and water table shifts that eventually made it uninhabitable. There's also evidence of tectonic activity. The region lies near several fault lines, and an earthquake could have caused sudden structural damage, contaminated water supplies, or shifted the river's course, cutting off trade and forcing evacuation. Still, none of these theories explain why the civilization didn't rebuild. Ancient cities were routinely abandoned and rebuilt after disasters. But after Mohenjo-Daro was deserted, it was never repopulated. The people didn't just leave. They never came back. Another possibility: climate change. Around the time of the civilization's collapse, climate data shows a gradual weakening of the monsoon cycle, which would have devastated agriculture. Droughts could have led to famine, civil unrest, and population dispersal. This theory fits with the regional decline of the entire Indus Valley network, not just Mohenjo-Daro, but dozens of settlements across the region that shrank or vanished around the same time. What makes the collapse so eerie is its non-violent nature. No citywide fires, no invasion markers. It was a quiet, creeping unraveling, and in that quietness lies its mystery. The city's script, known as the Indus script, remains undeciphered to this day. Hundreds of seals bearing pictographs and symbols have been found, but no bilingual texts, like the Rosetta Stone, have ever surfaced. As a result, we don't know what the Harappans believed. We don't know their myths, their gods, their fears, or their hopes. We don't know if they saw disaster coming, or if they believed it was punishment, fate, or the end of an age. We only know that they stopped writing, and then they were gone. Recent excavations have uncovered more clues. In 2014, A joint team of Indian and American researchers unearthed signs of violence in other Indus Valley sites: blunt, forced trauma, mass graves, and even instances of ritual decapitation. Could it be that the peaceful image of the Indus civilization is a modern misreading? That its collapse involved internal strife, rebellion, or even religious upheaval? Without their texts, we can't be sure, but the picture becomes more complex. This was not a single city falling to a single cause. It was an entire civilization quietly folding inward, its light dimming like an ember in the wind. And then there's the final, haunting clue. A recent study published in 2020 reanalyzed the skeletons found in Mohenjo-Daro, those lying in the streets, long thought to be victims of sudden catastrophe. The study found something unexpected. They were not all from the same time. They may have died decades apart, some centuries. What archaeologists had interpreted as a mass death event may actually have been a slow abandonment, punctuated by isolated deaths over time. In this view, Mohenjo-Daro didn't end in apocalypse. It faded. People left gradually as resources dried, rivers changed, or society fractured. The final residents, perhaps a handful of families, remained in their homes until they too passed, unnoticed by history. And so, the meltdown of Mohenjo-Daro may not have been an explosion, or a divine punishment, or a forgotten war. It may have been an extinction of momentum, a soft collapse, one that left no monuments to the dead, no farewell epigraphs, no legends of a fall, just rows of brick-lined streets, abandoned, just skeletons without epitaphs, just a civilization that stepped into the fog of prehistory and never returned. What happened in Mohenjo-Daro reminds us that collapse does not always look like fire and ruin. Sometimes it looks like silence, and sometimes the most powerful civilizations die not with a cry, but with a whisper. The fire that ended. Hattusa, the Hittite Empire's sudden fall. High in the Anatolian plateau, where rugged mountains break the horizon and the air turns sharp with altitude, there once stood a city of stone and power. Its gates were carved with lions. Its walls stretched across cliffs, and its archives held thousands of clay tablets, laws, treaties, prophecies, and royal decrees. This was Hattusa, the capital of the Hittite Empire, one of the great powers of the ancient world. And then, around 1200 BCE, it was gone, not just the city, the empire. Overnight, it seems, the Hittites vanished from history, their capital burned, their language silenced, their records buried beneath ash and time. No chronicler tells us who delivered the final blow. No victory inscription celebrates their fall. Only ruins remain, blackened, silent, and unanswered. The Hittite Empire was, in its time, a peer to Egypt, Babylon, and Assyria. From their stronghold in central Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, they ruled over a vast domain stretching from the Aegean Sea to the Euphrates River. They built roads, minted treaties, and fielded chariot armies. They spoke a language that now holds the honor of being the oldest known Indo-European language preserved in writing. And they dared to challenge Ramses II of Egypt at the Battle of Kadesh, around 1274 BCE, an event so significant that both sides declared victory and signed what is now considered the world's oldest surviving peace treaty. But just a generation or two later, their capital was burning. The Hittite state, which had taken centuries to build, ceased to exist. So what happened? The answer is buried in fragments. The archaeological record shows that Hattusa was destroyed by fire. Burn layers in the city's core suggest a violent and thorough sacking. Walls collapsed, buildings razed, archives shattered, but no mass graves, no royal tomb, no record of resistance. It's as if the city's defenders vanished before the flames arrived. The empire's outposts, from northern Syria to western Anatolia, fell in quick succession. Trade routes collapsed. Provincial governors stopped sending tribute. Writing ceased. And all of this occurred during a wider event that historians call the Late Bronze Age collapse, a period of cascading civilizational failure that brought down Mycenaean Greece, Ugarit, and large portions of the Levant. The Hittites were among its most prominent casualties, but unlike others, their fall was total. Several theories compete for what caused the Hittite collapse. One of the most discussed involves the infamous Sea Peoples, mysterious maritime invaders who raided cities across the eastern Mediterranean during this period. Egyptian records speak of waves of these invaders. Some suggest that the Hittite coasts, particularly Tarhuntassa and Ugarit, were sacked first, weakening the empire from its maritime flanks. But there's a problem. The Sea Peoples were raiders, not occupiers. They may have been the hammer blow, but not the chisel. Others point to climate catastrophe. Drought records from tree rings and lakebed sediments across Anatolia indicate a prolonged and severe dry spell around 1200 BCE. Crops failed. Famine followed. There is even a letter from the king of Ugarit to the Hittites, pleading for grain shipments, saying the city is on the brink of starvation. The Hittites, in turn, were likely unable to provide food, even for their own heartland. Starvation destabilizes. Empires far faster than war. Internal strife is another possibility. The final decades of the empire show signs of political instability. The royal succession was contested. Governors began acting independently. Some Hittite vassals, like those in Arzawa and Kizzuwatna, had long histories of rebellion. It's possible that the central government in Hattusa lost control of its periphery, and that the city's final destruction came not from foreign invaders, but from civil war or betrayal. One line of cuneiform text, found on a fragment in Boğazkale, ancient Hattusa, reads, "The land has turned against itself. The city is silent." Poetic or prophetic. Perhaps the most compelling piece of evidence lies in the city's archives. Thousands of clay tablets, baked in the fire that destroyed the palace, contain the Hittites' legal codes, diplomatic letters, and religious texts. One tablet, from a seer named Muwatalli, contains a series of omens warning of doom. When the storm god turns his face away, the enemies of the land grow strong. If the king does not purify the city, the fire will come from within. These were not idle fears. The Hittites believed in the divine contract, that kings ruled by favor of the gods, and that broken oaths or impure rituals could bring divine wrath. Some scholars believe that the empire, stretched thin and plagued by internal division, saw its own collapse as fated. The kings prayed, purified, performed sacrifices, but the gods remained silent, and the fires came anyway. There's a strange irony in how complete the Hittite collapse was. Unlike Egypt, which revived, or Assyria, which rose again, the Hittite world vanished completely. For centuries, the very memory of the Hittites was lost. They were erased from classical histories. Only vague references in the Hebrew Bible remained, mentioning a mysterious people called the Hittites, often misunderstood or misattributed. It wasn't until the early 20th century that archaeologists rediscovered Hattusa and the Hittite language, written in cuneiform on clay tablets, but linguistically unrelated to Sumerian or Akkadian. When linguists cracked the code, they realized they were looking at an Indo-European tongue, a cousin to Latin, Greek, and Sanskrit, but far older. It was as if a lost sibling of Western civilization had been found, long dead, long buried, and finally able to speak again. Today, the ruins of Hattusa lie quietly near the Turkish village of Boğazkale. The stone lions still guard the ancient gate. The vast city walls still trace the outline of a vanished kingdom. The archives, recovered and studied, continue to whisper the final days of a civilization that once stood among giants. We know more about the Hittites now than we did a century ago, but we still don't know who lit the fire. Was it a foreign enemy, a vengeful rival, a starving populace, a coup from within? Or did the empire collapse under the weight of its own uncertainty, its rulers paralyzed, its people scattered, its gods silent? The fall of Hattusa was not just the end of a city, it was the loss of memory itself. A civilization's voice extinguished so thoroughly that for millennia no one even remembered to ask the question. What happened to the Hittites? The ruins remain, but the answer, still lost in the ash. The Phaistos disc, a language no one can read. It was a summer afternoon in 1908, on the sun-drenched island of Crete, when Italian archaeologist Luigi Pernier stumbled upon something strange beneath the ruins of the Minoan palace at Phaistos. Nestled in a basement room, simple, unadorned, likely overlooked, lay a circular object buried in the rubble, just 6 inches across, made of fired clay, covered on both sides with mysterious symbols spiraling inward in neat concentric circles, symbols that had never been seen before. This was the Phaistos disc, and more than a century later, it remains undeciphered. No one knows what language it represents. No one knows what the symbols mean. No one even knows if it's writing, or something else entirely. It's been called the world's first printing system, a religious chant, a game board, a forgery, and even an alien artifact. But one thing is certain. It is one of the greatest unsolved cases in ancient history. Let's start with the object itself. The disc is about 15 centimeters in diameter and less than 2 centimeters thick. It's made of fine clay, perfectly baked to a reddish. What makes it extraordinary is not the material, but the way it was inscribed. Rather than carved or etched, the symbols were stamped into the wet clay using individual seals, like movable type. There are 45 distinct symbols, repeated in various sequences across 242 tokens, divided into 61 segments or words. The figures depict everything from human heads and arms to plumed helmets, fish, flowers, boats, shields, and axes. And unlike any other writing system of the ancient world, these symbols were pressed rather than drawn, suggesting a systematized method of production that predates Gutenberg's printing press by over 3,000 years. It is the only artifact of its kind, and no other object has been found with the same writing. That's the first mystery. Why only one? In every major ancient script, Egyptian hieroglyphs, Mesopotamian cuneiform, even Minoan Linear A, we have multiple examples. Dozens, hundreds, sometimes thousands. But the Phaistos disc stands alone, no duplicates, no fragments elsewhere, no signs of evolution or regional variation. Was it a prototype, a sacred item, a message in a bottle, or worse? Could it be a forgery, planted to deceive? Most archaeologists reject the idea of forgery. The disc was discovered during a legitimate excavation before the era of mass tourism and looted artifacts, Pernier documented the find meticulously. The soil layer, location, and associated Minoan pottery all suggest authenticity. But that doesn't solve the deeper mystery. What does it say? Over the past century, dozens of attempts have been made to decode the disc. Some claim it is a religious hymn chanted by priestesses in Minoan temples. Others believe it's a fertility invocation, based on recurring images of women, plants, and bulls. Some scholars think it's a narrative, a myth perhaps, or a ritual journey. Still others argue it's a syllabary, akin to the later linear B script used by the Mycenaeans to write early Greek. But the symbol set doesn't match. A few maverick theorists insist it's a code, intentionally obscure. And some believe it's not writing at all, but a board game, a mathematical tool, or an early mnemonic device used for oral teaching. None of these theories has gained universal acceptance. Why? Because the disc lacks a Rosetta Stone, a bilingual inscription to match an unknown language to a known one. And more importantly, we don't know what language it's even supposed to represent. The Minoans, the people who likely created the disc, left behind two major scripts, Cretan hieroglyphs and Linear A. Both remain undeciphered. Without a known spoken language to anchor the symbols, any attempt at translation is educated speculation at best. Linear B, the script of the later Mycenaean Greeks, was deciphered in the 1950s, revealing an early form of Greek. But the Phaistos disc shares no meaningful overlap with Linear B, and its stylized pictographs are much closer to proto-writing systems than to phonetic alphabets. That leads some to believe the disc was created by a different culture entirely, possibly travelers, merchants, or refugees who passed through Crete during the Bronze Age's Great Migrations. Could the Phaistos disc be the last artifact of a lost language, a final message from a culture that left nothing else behind? One bold theory suggests that the disc may represent a ritual calendar. The spiral layout is not just decorative, it's mathematically consistent, with 31 segments on one side and 30 on the other. That adds up to 61, the number of days in 2 lunar months. If each symbol cluster marks a day, the disc could have been used to track seasonal rituals, moon phases, or agricultural rites. This would align with what we know of Minoan religion, which was deeply tied to cycles of fertility, moon worship, and sacred feminine deities. The presence of repetitive patterns, animal motifs, and gestural symbols might support this idea, but, again, without a clear comparative script, this remains speculation. The symbols themselves are rich with meaning, but meaning we no longer understand. There is a plumed head, perhaps a deity or priest, a boomerang, maybe a weapon or agricultural tool, a rosette, which appears in many Minoan religious contexts, a sling, a boat, a fish, a bee, a bird. Are these syllables, ideas, pictographs representing full concepts? The disc's spiral structure is also unique. Unlike traditional left-to-right or top-to-bottom inscriptions, the Phaistos disc spirals inward, as if guiding the reader or listener toward a central truth. That inward motion is itself symbolic. A journey, a descent, into what? A ritual, a prayer, a riddle, or something far more profound? In recent years, technology has taken a turn. High-resolution scans, 3D modeling, and machine learning pattern analysis have allowed researchers to isolate rhythmic patterns and symbol clusters. Some linguists suggest the disc may contain repetition, consistent with refrains in songs or chants. Still, without additional examples, the models remain inconclusive. We are left with the disc itself, 6 inches of clay, inscribed by someone whose name we'll never know, in a language no longer spoken, for a purpose lost to the tides of time. It is both message and mystery, and perhaps that is the disca's final purpose. To remind us that even in an age of data and decoding, some messages were not meant to be read. They were meant to be remembered. Even if their meaning has faded, their presence endures. Because somewhere, in the quiet chambers of ancient Phaistos, someone pressed those symbols into clay, not for us, but for someone like us. Someone who understood, who recognized each sign, who heard the voice in the spiral. And now that voice is silent, or perhaps still whispering, waiting to be heard again. The sacred geometry of Stonehenge. In the misty heart of southern England, where the wind rolls over green hills and the morning fog hangs like breath held too long, stand the stones, massive, silent, unmoving for millennia. Some stand upright, others lean or have fallen. But all form a circle, more precisely, a series of interlocking circles and arcs, laid out with a precision that seems impossible for its time. This is Stonehenge, perhaps the most iconic megalithic monument on Earth, and despite centuries of study, excavation, and speculation, we still do not fully understand who built it, why, or how. Because Stonehenge is not just a monument, it is a riddle in stone, a message from the ancient world carved into geometry, astronomy, and silence. Stonehenge is located on Salisbury Plain, a vast chalk plateau in Wiltshire, England. The site we know today is only the central component of what was once a much larger ceremonial landscape, filled with burial mounds, avenues, and timber structures. Construction took place in phases, spanning over 1,500 years, beginning around 3100 BCE. That's before the invention of the wheel in Britain, before metal tools, before the pyramids of Egypt. Yet the earliest builders dug a circular ditch and bank, aligned to the midsummer sunrise and midwinter sunset, an alignment maintained through every subsequent phase of construction. This astronomical alignment is not a coincidence, it is the key. The stone circle most people recognize, the ring of upright sarsen stones, each over 20 feet tall and weighing up to 25 tons, was erected around 2500 BCE. Each pair of uprights is topped with a horizontal lintel, creating a trilithon. These trilithons once formed a complete ring, many now lie fallen. Inside this sarsen circle is another ring, the blue stones, smaller but no less mysterious. These stones weigh up to 4 tons and come not from local quarries, but from the Preseli Hills of Wales, over 150 miles away. The transportation of these stones alone is a marvel. No wheeled carts, no iron tools, just rope, manpower, and perhaps sledges or waterways. Yet the blue stones were not an afterthought. They were placed with purpose, in patterns that were adjusted again and again over centuries. Some scholars now believe the blue stones were sacred objects, imbued with meaning or healing powers. Their movement from Wales to Wessex may have been part of a pilgrimage route, connecting different tribal or spiritual centres. But Stonehenge wasn't built all at once. It evolved, and that evolution makes its purpose even harder to pin down. So what was Stonehenge? Theories abound. Some suggest it was an astronomical observatory used to track the solar calendar and predict eclipses, a temple to the sun and moon, aligning with solstices and equinoxes in a celestial dance, a sacred burial site reserved for an elite priesthood or ruling class, a healing center where people came for spiritual or physical restoration, a political unifier built to bring together disparate tribal groups under a shared ritual identity. Each of these theories has merit. Each is supported by fragments of evidence, human remains, pollen data, alignments, nearby monuments. And yet, none is complete. Because Stonehenge was not one thing. It was a living site, with layers of meaning accumulated over generations. A cathedral, a calendar, a grave, a memory. One of the most striking features is the monument's precise geometry. The circle is almost perfect, carved into uneven land using only sightlines and ropes. The spacing of stones reflects an understanding of Pythagorean triangles. Long before Pythagoras was born, the axis of the monument aligns to the sun's rise and fall at key points in the solar year. In fact, on Midsummer's Day, the sun rises directly above the heelstone, casting a beam of light down the central avenue into the heart of the circle. This is not accidental. It is the architecture of alignment, a marriage of earth and sky. But who taught these principles, and why encode them in stone? Recent discoveries suggest that Stonehenge was part of a much larger ceremonial landscape. Just 2 miles away, at Durrington Walls, archaeologists unearthed the remains of a massive Neolithic settlement, dozens of houses, animal bones, pottery, and evidence of feasting on a massive scale. It is believed that Durrington Walls was occupied seasonally, particularly during the winter solstice. This may suggest that people travelled to Stonehenge during key points in the year, not just to observe the heavens, but to commune with the dead. Many of the cremated remains found at Stonehenge, carefully buried in pits within the circle, appear to be elite individuals, transported from distant regions. One analysis of tooth enamel showed that some people had come from as far as Wales, perhaps the same region as the Bluestones. This points to a pan-British spiritual centre, a place of unification, ceremony, and remembrance. But the deeper mystery lies not just in the structure, but in the intention. Why go to such effort? Why quarry, shape, and transport multi-ton stones over impossible distances? Why align them with the sun? Why bury the dead among them? Some suggest a prehistoric priesthood, guardians of sacred knowledge, astronomers and architects who held power through ritual and prophecy. Others believe the builders were ordinary people, unified by a shared cosmology that transcended tribe and territory. In this view, Stonehenge represents not elite dominance, but collective belief. Either way, it required organization, planning, and a level of social complexity not previously associated with Neolithic Britain. It redefines what we thought ancient people could achieve. In recent years, ground-penetrating radar and aerial surveys have revealed dozens of previously unknown structures around Stonehenge, buried wooden circles, ditches, and barrows. The area wasn't just a temple, it was a ritual landscape, rich with memory, encoded in topography, and many of these structures echo the same patterns: circles, alignments, and geometric motifs. It's as if an entire region was calibrated to the cosmos. The builders of Stonehenge were not just stargazers, they were architects of time, and yet, by around 1600 BCE, the site began to fall into disuse. The stones remained, but the rituals stopped. No new burials, no new constructions. Why? Climate change? Cultural shift? New religious ideas? We don't know. The people who built Stonehenge left no written records, no mythologies, no names, no carved instructions, just stones and silence. And yet, even in silence, Stonehenge speaks. It speaks of a world where time was sacred, where life and death were mapped to the movement of the sun, where people gathered not for war, but for alignment of community, spirit, and sky. Stonehenge was not meant to be a puzzle. It was meant to be a mirror of heaven on earth, and maybe that's why it endures. Because in its stones, we see the ancient human impulse to seek meaning beyond the horizon, to find rhythm in the turning sky, to build, in stone, what cannot be said in words, the Sumerian king list, kings who ruled for thousands of years. In the land between the rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, civilization was born. There, more than 5,000 years ago, the Sumerians carved cities from mud and time. They built ziggurats that reached toward the heavens, invented writing, mapped the stars, and forged laws from clay. But among their most curious and confounding artifacts is a simple list, a list of kings. It begins in the mythical past and ends in historical memory. It reads like a record, but also like a riddle. It is known as the Sumerian king list, and it contains the names of kings who ruled not for decades, but for centuries, even thousands of years, and no one knows exactly why. The Sumerian king list exists in multiple versions, but the most complete copy was found in the early 20th century in the ruins of ancient Larsa, inscribed on a clay prism now housed in the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford. The list begins. After kingship had descended from heaven, kingship was in Eridu, and so begins a sequence of rulers and cities, with reign lengths so implausible, they verge on the fantastical. Alulim, king of Eridu, ruled for 28,800 years. His successor, Alalgar, reigned for 36,000 years. The next kings reigned for 28,800, 21,000, 18,600, and 18,600 years, respectively. And then came a great flood. After the flood, the list resets, with more plausible reign lengths and names that gradually intersect with historically verifiable rulers, such as Gilgamesh of Uruk and kings of Akkad and Ur. But that early section, the antediluvian kings, remains one of the most baffling mysteries in ancient literature. What are we to make of these millennium-spanning monarchs? Did the Sumerians believe these rulers actually lived for thousands of years? Or was this poetic symbolism? Were they gods, men, myths? And what was the purpose of listing them at all? Some scholars argue that the Sumerian king list was not intended as a historical document, but as a theological or ideological text, a sacred lineage linking divine kingship from its celestial origins to the present day. In this interpretation, the immense reign lengths serve a symbolic function, emphasizing the primordial greatness of early rulers and legitimizing later kings by showing an unbroken chain of divine authority. But others see clues pointing toward lost historical memories, distorted over centuries, but grounded in events or individuals now lost to us. The structure of the list is meticulous. It names the city where kingship resided, the name of the king, and the length of reign, always using the sexagesimal base 60 number system. For example, in Eridu, Alulim became king. He ruled for 28,800 years. Eridu was abandoned. Kingship was taken to Bad Tabira. In Bad Tabira, Enmenluana ruled for 43,200 years. This migration of kingship from city to city mirrors the historical shifts of power in Mesopotamia, where cities like Ur, Uruk, and Kish rose and fell in influence. But the pre-flood portion of the list reads more like cosmic legend than history. The kings' names are semi-divine, their reigns impossible, their cities ancient beyond comprehension. And yet, the Sumerians listed them with the same care and structure as their real kings. Why? There are precedents in other cultures. In the Hebrew Bible, early patriarchs live for extraordinary lengths. Adam to 930 years, Methuselah to 969. In Chinese and Egyptian traditions, similarly exaggerated lifespans are ascribed to mythical rulers. Could this be a common cultural device, linking the sacred past to the known present through metaphor? Or were these civilizations echoing fragments of a forgotten prehistory? A time before the flood, before writing, before cities. The mention of the Great Flood in the Sumerian king list is especially provocative. It marks a clear division in the text. Then the flood swept over. After the flood had swept over and kingship had descended from heaven, kingship was in Kish. This flood parallels the one found in the Epic of Gilgamesh, as well as the later Genesis flood narrative in the Bible. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, the hero meets Utnapishtim, a man who survived a divine flood by building a massive boat. Sound familiar? This story predates the biblical Noah by over 1,000 years. Could these myths preserve cultural memory of a real flood? Geological studies of Mesopotamia have confirmed that massive regional floods did occur in the area between 3000 and 2000 BCE. River courses changed. Cities were inundated. It is not unthinkable that such events were mythologized into a singular global deluge. If so, the Sumerian king list may preserve the names of kings who ruled before this catastrophe, transmitted orally for generations, before being committed to clay. But even if they are symbolic, the sheer consistency of their inclusion is striking. This was no mere mythology, it was canon. Another mystery is why some kings are omitted. Famous rulers like Lugalzagesi, who united Sumer before the rise of Sargon of Akkad, do not appear on some versions of the list. Nor does Tiamat, the primordial goddess from the Sumerian Babylonian creation epic. This suggests the king list was also political, perhaps curated by later dynasties to legitimize their own claims by emphasizing certain lineages and omitting inconvenient ones. In this light, the king list becomes both a historical document and a propaganda tool, a curated ancestry scroll, giving the aura of divine right to those who held it. But this only adds layers to the mystery, because beneath its strategic omissions and mythic overtones, there remains something uncannily systematic about the record. It is a document that wants to be trusted, and yet it opens with kings who ruled for 10,000 years. Some fringe researchers have used the Sumerian king list to argue for lost civilizations, ancient astronauts, or pre-flood high technology. They point to the repeated mention of kingship descending from heaven, to the extreme ages, and to the sudden shift after the flood. They ask, what if these were not myths? What if the antediluvian kings represent a forgotten epoch of humanity, erased by global cataclysm? Mainstream archaeologists reject these theories. They point out that Sumerian cosmology was deeply mythological, that reign lengths were stylized, and that there is no physical evidence of such an advanced lost world. Still, the mystery remains, because the Sumerians, among the most logical, administrative, and literate peoples in ancient history, wrote it all down, not in verse, not in myth, but as history. Today, the Sumerian king list remains a fascinating paradox, too structured to be dismissed, too implausible to be accepted. It sits in the middle of the Venn diagram between truth, symbol, and memory, a text that straddles the line between what was and what might have been. Perhaps it was meant to do exactly that. To tell us that the world began in mystery, passed through chaos, and was finally tamed by names carved into clay. Perhaps that's why the first line doesn't say kingship began. It says kingship descended from heaven. Because to the Sumerians, power wasn't seized, it was given, and when it no longer served the gods, it was taken away. The disappearance of the Etruscans, a vanished identity. When you walk the cobbled streets of Rome, you tread upon the bones of an empire. But beneath those bones, deeper in time, deeper in silence, lies another civilization. Older than Rome, more mysterious, and in many ways, the parent of Roman greatness. They were called the Etruscans. They gave Rome its alphabet, its temple design, its gladiatorial games, even its symbols of kingship, the fasces, the lituus, the curule chair, and, yet by the time Rome reached its golden age, the Etruscans had disappeared. No grand rebellion, no sudden conquest, no decisive war, just a gradual fading. A culture once rich in colour, music and ceremony became a footnote in its own story. And historians still ask, how does an entire people vanish? The Etruscans flourished between roughly 900 BCE and 100 BCE in the region of central Italy now known as Tuscany, a name that comes in fact from them, Tusci, as the Romans called them. Their own name for themselves was likely Ravenna. At their peak, they occupied a network of city-states, Tarquinia, Veii, Clusium, Volterra, and others, each politically independent but culturally linked. They shared language, religion, and ritual, and they traded as far as Greece, Phoenicia, and North Africa. The Etruscans built arched doorways, irrigation systems, and fortified acropolises. They mastered bronze working, goldsmithing, and fresco painting. Their tombs are decorated with images of banquets, music, dancing, and myth, suggesting a culture both refined and joyful. But unlike their neighbours, they left no surviving literature. We do not have their epics, we do not have their histories, we do not have their voices. Only fragments remain, inscriptions on tombs, religious texts, and scattered glosses from Roman authors. And this silence makes their disappearance all the more haunting. So what happened to the Etruscans? The most obvious explanation is absorption by Rome. As the Roman Republic expanded in the 4th and 3rd centuries BCE, it slowly incorporated the Etruscan city-states, sometimes through war, more often through diplomacy, alliances, and cultural assimilation. The last Etruscan stronghold, Volsinii, was destroyed in 264 BCE, and its aristocrats were relocated to a new Roman colony. After that, no major Etruscan cities held political power. But conquest does not always mean cultural erasure. The Gauls were conquered but remembered. The Greeks were conquered but endured. The Etruscans somehow were forgotten. One key factor is language. The Etruscan language is not Indo-European. It has no clear relatives in the ancient Mediterranean world, except perhaps the enigmatic Lemnian language of the Aegean island Lemnos, suggesting a prehistoric migration. Despite extensive inscriptions, especially funerary, we have never fully deciphered Etruscan. We can sound out the letters. We can recognize names, dates, and some formulas, but the grammar and syntax remain elusive, and the vocabulary is limited. Without understanding their words, we cannot understand their thoughts, their beliefs, or their self-perception, their myths, their science, their histories, all lost. The Romans, for their part, held the Etruscans in complicated regard. They respected Etruscan religion, so much so that Roman priests, called haruspices, studied Etruscan manuals to divine omens from the entrails of animals. They adopted Etruscan symbols of power, the purple robe, the golden crown, the curved scepter. And yet, they rarely preserved Etruscan literature or culture. Even Livy, Pliny, and Cicero, who mention Etruscan customs, often portray them as quaint, archaic, or decadent. To Rome, the Etruscans were the past, a stepping stone, not a foundation. And so, when Rome absorbed Etruria, it didn't just conquer the people, it replaced their identity. Some archaeologists believe that this replacement was intentionally engineered. Etruscan tombs were sealed and buried. Sacred texts, according to Roman accounts, were deliberately hidden or destroyed. Priestly lineages were co-opted into Roman religious offices, stripped of their original roles. Others argue that the Etruscans assimilated willingly, adopting Roman dress, language, and law to maintain elite status within the Republic. In this view, the Etruscan disappearance was not violent, but voluntary. A slow, generational shift from "we are different" to "we are Roman now." But even that raises questions. How does a literate, sophisticated, internationally connected civilization leave no preserved literature? How does a people with a centuries-old religious tradition leave no temples standing, no epic preserved in translation? It's as if the record of their soul was erased, accidentally or by design. And then there's the matter of their origin. The Etruscans appear in the archaeological record around 900 BCE during the Iron Age. Their earlier settlements evolved from Villanovan culture, marked by distinctive cremation urns and burial rites. But the Etruscans were different in language, in art, in cosmology. Herodotus claimed they were Lydians, migrants, from Anatolia who crossed the Aegean to escape famine. Dionysius of Halicarnassus, a Roman-era Greek historian, disagreed, arguing they were native Italians evolved from indigenous peoples. Modern genetics has produced conflicting results. Some studies suggest links between ancient Etruscan remains and populations from the Near East. Others show continuity with Central Italian gene pools, reinforcing a local origin. Still others hint at a mixed population, absorbing influences from the Eastern Mediterranean, Mycenaean Greece, and even the Phoenicians. In the end, the mystery of where the Etruscans came from mirrors the mystery of where they went. Their identity was always fluid. And in that fluidity, perhaps they dissolved. The most direct window into the Etruscan mind lies in their tombs. These were not grim burial pits. They were houses of the dead, chambers carved into hillsides, painted with vibrant frescoes, dancers, musicians, banquets, chariots, leopards, dolphins. The tomb of the leopards in Tarquinia, for instance, shows reclining figures raising cups, sharing food, engaging in what seems like joyful celebration. Death, to the Etruscans, was not an end, but a continuation. They believed in an afterlife, but it was not paradise. It was a shadowy underworld filled with gates, guardians, and monsters. Their gods were both benevolent and terrifying. They practiced divination, studied lightning patterns, read livers of animals to interpret the will of the gods. They mapped the sky into regions of fate, each governed by a deity. In short, the Etruscans lived in a world where everything was a sign, a world where fate was both fixed and negotiable, a world that now lies mute beneath the soil. So what is the legacy of the Etruscans? In Rome, it is everywhere, hidden in plain sight. The arch, that cornerstone of Roman engineering, was perfected by Etruscan builders. The Roman Senate met under a title, Curia, borrowed from Etruscan religious terminology. The lituus, The crooked staff held by Roman augurs was an Etruscan invention. Even Rome's founding kings, according to tradition, were of Etruscan descent, including the last monarch, Tarquinius Superbus, whose tyranny gave birth to the Roman Republic. And yet, ask the average Roman of the imperial period what he knew of the Etruscans, and he might shrug. The culture that taught Rome to be Rome was forgotten by Rome. Today, the Etruscans are experiencing a slow renaissance. New excavations in Poggio Civitate, Vetulonia, and Cerveteri reveal advanced metallurgy, far-reaching trade, and complex urban layouts. Digital imaging and AI are beginning to unlock patterns in their inscriptions. Scholars hope that within the next few decades, the Etruscan language may be partially deciphered, shedding light on their mythology, lore, and literature. But until then, we rely on tombs, on ashes, on echoes. The disappearance of the Etruscans was not a collapse. It was an absorption, a cultural sleep. They were not forgotten because they failed. They were forgotten because they succeeded so well that their identity bled into their conquerors. The Etruscans did not fall with a cry. They were quietly inherited. But in the silence they left, we hear the question that still echoes through their frescoed tombs. Who were we before the Romans remembered us only as shadows? The Great Pyramid Code, how was it built without tools? Rising from the Giza Plateau like a fossilized thought, it has stood for over 4,500 years, immune to time, storm, and shifting sand. The Great Pyramid of Giza, tomb of the pharaoh Khufu, is the last remaining wonder of the ancient world. It was built before the wheel reached Egypt, before iron tools, before pulley systems, cranes, or even complex math, at least as we understand it. And yet, there it stands, 147 meters tall, composed of over 2.3 million limestone and granite blocks, each weighing up to 80 tons, aligned to the cardinal directions with precision so exact, it varies by only fractions of a degree. The Great Pyramid is not just a tomb, it is an engineering enigma. How was it built, and what secrets still lie encoded in its structure? Pharaoh Khufu, also known by his Greek name, Cheops, commissioned the pyramid during Egypt's 4th dynasty, around 2560 BCE. According to the traditional account, construction took about 20 years and required tens of thousands of laborers. The site is massive, covering 13 acres, with each side originally measuring 230 meters in length and rising at a perfect 51.5-degree angle. It was once encased in polished white Tura limestone, reflecting the sun so brilliantly that ancient travelers described it as a beacon on the horizon. Today, the casing stones are mostly gone, stripped away in later centuries, but the core structure remains. And within that core lies the greatest mystery of all. How did Bronze Age workers, using copper chisels, wooden sledges, and no pulleys, construct something so monumental that modern engineers still debate whether it could be done today? Let's begin with the logistics. To build the Great Pyramid in 20 years, the ancient builders would have had to cut, shape, transport, and place one block every 2.5 minutes, working day and night without pause. Most of the limestone blocks came from nearby quarries, but the granite slabs used in the king's chamber came from Aswan, over 500 miles away. Transporting 80-ton blocks down the Nile, hauling them overland, and then lifting them 130 vertical feet into the structure is no small feat. So how did they do it? Several mainstream theories exist. Ramp theory is one of the Oldest and most widely accepted ideas is that the builders used ramps to haul stones up the sides of the growing pyramid. But what kind of ramp? Straight ramps would have needed to be miles long to maintain a gentle slope. Zigzagging ramps are more compact, but leave no physical trace. Spiral ramps built around the pyramid could have worked, but would have obstructed the view of construction and required extreme precision. No definitive ramp remains have been found, and as the pyramid grew higher, the difficulty of extending the ramp increased exponentially. Lever and counterweight systems. Others suggest the Egyptians used levers to raise stones and stages. A block could be lifted slightly and then shored up with smaller stones, repeating the process until it reached the desired height. Simple, but time-consuming. Internal spiral ramps. In 2005, architect Jean-Pierre Houdin proposed a radical theory that the pyramid was constructed using an internal spiral ramp hidden within the structure itself. This would have allowed workers to haul stones upward without the need for external ramps. CT scans and radar imaging have shown anomalies in the pyramid's internal structure that could support this idea, but definitive proof remains elusive. What complicates the matter is the precision of the pyramid's construction. Each side is aligned almost perfectly with the four cardinal directions: true north, south, east, and west, within 3/60th of a degree. This level of accuracy would be challenging, even with modern surveying tools, yet the Egyptians had no compasses, no laser levels, no theodolites. It's believed they used simple tools like the merket, a kind of plumb line, and shadow tracking methods based on the sun and stars, particularly the pole star of the era, Thuban, in the constellation Draco. If true, this suggests a level of astronomical sophistication far beyond what we usually associate with the Bronze Age. And then there's the interior layout. Unlike other pyramids, the Great Pyramid does not follow a standard burial chamber model. Instead, it features the descending passage leading deep underground, the ascending passage connecting to the Queen's Chamber, whose name is a misnomer, the Grand Gallery, a 28-foot tall sloped corridor leading to the King's Chamber, built from massive granite blocks. Above the King's Chamber are 5 relieving chambers stacked one atop the other, designed to redistribute weight. These spaces, accessible only by crawling through narrow shafts, were never meant to be visited. So, why build them at all? More importantly, what lies behind them? In 2017, the mystery deepened. Using muon tomography, a scanning method that detects cosmic particles passing through solid rock, scientists discovered a large void above the Grand Gallery, roughly 30 meters long. It is the first major discovery inside the pyramid in centuries, but we do not know what it is. A chamber? A structural cavity? An undiscovered ritual space? It has not yet been explored. No endoscopic probes have reached it. Its purpose remains unknown. This has reignited speculation that the pyramid may still hide secret rooms, burial caches, or even coded knowledge. Some researchers believe the Great Pyramid encodes mathematical constants far ahead of their time. The ratio of its perimeter to its height is approximately 2p, suggesting knowledge of pi. The pyramid's base squared, divided by twice its height, gives a close approximation of the golden ratio. The pyramid's height corresponds proportionally to the Earth's radius, if scaled. The site's location, at 29.9792 degree N latitude, eerily mirrors the speed of light in meters per second, 299,192,458 mes. Coincidence? Perhaps. But the accumulation of these coincidences invites the question, were the builders encoding knowledge, mathematical, astronomical, or metaphysical, into the pyramid's form? And if so, who taught them? Some fringe theorists have suggested the Great Pyramid was not a tomb at all. Instead, it may have been a power plant using water and sound resonance to generate energy, a resonance chamber amplifying Earth's natural frequencies, a repository of knowledge designed to withstand cataclysm and preserve information for future civilizations, or even a spiritual initiation center where chosen individuals were transformed by isolation, sound, and geometry. While these ideas are not accepted by mainstream archaeology, they reflect a growing sense that the pyramid was more than a grave, because no mummy of Khufu has ever been found inside, and no hieroglyphs exist within the structure. It is the only major pyramid without decoration, entirely devoid of text or imagery, a tomb without a tombstone. What if the pyramid wasn't just about death? What if it was about order, the alignment of sky and stone, the taming of chaos, the creation of a structure so perfect, so enduring, that it would outlive its own civilization? In that light, the Great Pyramid becomes less of a tomb and more of a cosmic anchor, a statement in stone that the universe has rules, and we can align with them. Today, the Great Pyramid still watches the sun rise over the desert. It has survived earthquakes, looters, and centuries of misinterpretation. It continues to inspire mathematicians, engineers, mystics, and dreamers. And though we now understand much about its construction, its quarries, its workers' village, its logistics, we still don't fully grasp why it was built with such impossible care, or what its silent stones are still trying to say. The Olmec Colossi, who carved the giants of Mesoamerica? Long before the rise of the Maya and the glory of the Aztecs, before pyramids pierced the jungles of Mesoamerica, there was a civilization so ancient, so enigmatic, that it is often called the mother culture of Central America. They left behind no written texts, no monumental cities, no great armies etched into murals, but they left faces, massive, stoic, eternal. The Olmec heads, carved from basalt boulders weighing up to 50 tons, these colossal stone sculptures stare out across time with expressions that are at once stern, introspective, and strangely human. Who carved them? Why? And how did such a formative civilization vanish, leaving behind some of the most arresting artifacts in ancient history, but so little else? The Olmecs lived in what is now southern Mexico, primarily in the modern-day states of Veracruz and Tabasco, between roughly 1500 BCE and 400 BCE. They occupied lush tropical lowlands, rich in rivers and fertile soil but prone to flooding and natural disasters. They are best known today for their artistic mastery and mysterious symbolism. From jade masks to ceremonial axes, the Olmecs displayed a level of craftsmanship unmatched in their time. But nothing compares to the heads. To date, 17 colossal heads have been discovered, ranging in height from 4 to 11 feet. Each was carved from a single basalt boulder, transported from quarries often dozens of miles away, and none of them are identical. Each has a distinct face, broad noses, full lips, almond-shaped eyes, often wearing what appear to be helmets, possibly ceremonial, headdresses or battle gear. Some suggest they are portraits of rulers, others believe they depict warriors, ancestors, or gods. But all agree. The heads are deliberate, labor-intensive, and monumental in purpose. They were meant to last, and they were meant to be seen. Transporting these stones through jungle and swamp was no small feat. The Olmecs had no wheels, no metal tools, and no pack animals, yet they managed to move multi-ton boulders from the Tuxtla Mountains, sometimes over 90 kilometers away, likely using a combination of log rollers, rafts, and sheer manpower. Why go to such effort? Why invest so much into a single sculpture? And why do these heads appear in isolation, often buried deliberately or half-hidden at ceremonial sites like San Lorenzo, La Venta, and Tres Zapotes? Some theorists believe the heads were markers of dynastic succession, erected to memorialize great leaders, possibly even lined along processional routes or plazas. Others suggest they were part of ancestor veneration, a physical connection between the living and the spiritual world. And still others posit that the heads were boundary stones, asserting power and identity in a landscape that was both sacred and volatile. But without texts, we don't know. We are left to interpret their meaning from stone alone. The Olmecs are not just mysterious for what they made, but for how early they made it. They were centuries ahead of their neighbors in Mesoamerica. They built the region's first known pyramidal mounds. They developed one of the earliest writing systems in the Americas, undeciphered and known from just a few fragments like the Cascajal block. They may have been the first in the Americas to use zero, a mathematical concept that would later become foundational for the Maya. In many ways, the Olmecs laid the blueprint for Mesoamerican culture, the sacred ball game, the importance of jaguar iconography, the duality of rulers as both human and divine, and yet they did not leave behind cities on the scale of Teotihuacan or Palenque. They did not leave walls covered in glyphs. They left traces, echoes, giants, and then they were gone. By around 400 BCE, major Olmec centers had been abandoned. The culture that had defined the region for over a millennium vanished from the archaeological record. Why? Some point to environmental collapse. The same rivers that fed their agriculture may have flooded catastrophically. Volcanic eruptions may have poisoned crops and driven populations to migrate. Others suggest internal unrest, a breakdown of elite systems or priestly authority. Still others believe the Olmecs did not collapse at all, but were absorbed into emerging cultures, such as the Zapotecs, Maya, and Teotihuacanos, who inherited and transformed Olmec traditions. Indeed, Olmec artistic motifs appear across later Mesoamerican art. Serpent gods, jaguar men, and deity masks echo the Olmec style. But as a cohesive identity, the Olmecs cease to exist. Their name, even, is not their own. It was given by the Aztecs thousands of years later, meaning rubber people, due to their region's natural latex. We don't know what the Olmecs called themselves. We don't know what they believed. We only know what they left behind, and what they left is breathtaking. Consider the La Venta site, one of the most important Olmec ceremonial centers. There, archaeologists uncovered an altar shaped like a cave mouth, adorned with serpents and faces, symbolizing the entrance to the underworld. In nearby burials, they found miniature scenes made of jade figurines, arranged like theatrical dioramas, suggesting ritual storytelling or myth enactment. Their art is full of symbolism. Cleft heads, infant jaguars, plumed serpents, and cross-legged figures with intense gazes. But without written records, we can only guess at their meanings. Were they stories, astrological maps, depictions of gods, kings, shamans? We don't know. One theory gaining attention is that the colossal heads may represent not just rulers, but cosmic archetypes, that each face is not an individual, but a mask of divine power, channeling the strength, wisdom, and lineage of a semi-divine dynasty. In this reading, the heads were not portraits, they were presences, standing watch over sacred space, linking past, present, and the spiritual realm. Supporting this idea is the fact that many heads were intentionally buried, as if retired from active duty, laid to rest with reverence. It may also explain their emotive power, because make no mistake, the faces of the Olmec heads are not generic, they are deeply expressive, and they look back at us, not as myths, but as people. Some fringe theories, of course, have taken this further. The unique facial features of the heads, especially their broad noses and full lips, have led some to suggest links to African populations, sparking speculation about transoceanic contact. Mainstream archaeology strongly disputes this. There is no genetic, cultural, or linguistic evidence to support pre-Columbian African contact with the Americas. The heads are more likely stylized representations of local Mesoamerican peoples, possibly elite warriors or rulers with helmets, which give the illusion of different proportions. But even this debate underscores a deeper point. The Olmec heads defy categorization. They are not easily ancient American. They are human, yet archetypal, timeless. Today, the heads remain at San Lorenzo, half buried in green fields, at La Venta, in museum gardens under the watch of howler monkeys, at Villahermosa, where they're preserved but still weathered, scarred, by time but unbroken, and in each one there's a question: who were you, what did you see, and why did your voice fall silent while your stone gaze endures? The Olmecs gave us no Rosetta Stone, no epic carved in stone, no map, but they gave us faces, and those faces remind us that history is not always told with words. Sometimes it is carved into stone, and sometimes it looks right at you. The mystery of the Antikythera mechanism, the ancient computer that shouldn't exist. In the year 1901, off the coast of a small Greek island called Antikythera, sponge divers searching the turquoise depths stumbled upon something they never expected to find. There, tangled in coral and seaweed among a trove of bronze statues and marble busts from a sunken Roman ship, was a lump of metal and wood, crusted, green with oxidation, shattered into fragments. It looked unremarkable, but inside it, hidden by millennia of sediment and seawater, was a mechanism that would upend our understanding of ancient technology. It would be decades before anyone fully realized what they had found: a geared machine, built in the 2nd century BCE, capable of tracking the movements of the sun, moon, and planets with mechanical precision. A device so advanced, it would not be matched again for over 1,000 years. This is the story of the Antikythera mechanism, the world's first known analog computer, and perhaps the most astonishing ancient artifact ever discovered. At first, no one understood what it was. Recovered in fragments, many broken, fused, or warped, the mechanism remained a mystery for decades. Only in the 1950s, when physicist Derek de Solla Price studied it with X-rays, did its astonishing complexity begin to emerge. Inside the corrosion were interlocking bronze gears, not just a few, but more than 30. Gears with teeth of varying size, gears that turned other gears, gears inscribed with tiny Greek letters. Price called it like finding a jet plane in the tomb of Tutankhamun. He wasn't wrong. The device is now understood to have had multiple dials and pointers, including a front dial that showed the zodiac and the Egyptian calendar, with a rotating hand that tracked the position of the sun and moon, a back dial that predicted lunar and solar eclipses using a 223-month Saros cycle. Another dial that showed the Metonic cycle, a 19-year period after which the lunar phases repeat on the same days of the year. Indicators that accounted for the irregularity of the moon's orbit are a level of astronomical detail requiring not only observation but mathematical modeling. Some reconstructions suggest it could also track the positions of the 5 known planets: Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, using epicyclical gearing. And all of this in a device small enough to fit inside a shoebox. How was this possible? The level of mechanical sophistication in the Antikythera mechanism was centuries ahead of its time. Until its discovery, the oldest known geared devices came from the 14th century CE, the era of medieval clockmakers. Yet this was built some time, between 150 and 100 BCE, possibly even earlier. Its gears were cut with incredible precision, their teeth carefully measured to mesh smoothly. The mathematical ratios suggest deep knowledge of trigonometry, lunar cycles, and celestial motion. Nothing like it appears in the archaeological record before, or for centuries afterward. It is a technological ghost, an orphan, and that has led to one of the most compelling historical questions of the modern era. Was ancient Greek science more advanced than we ever imagined? Let's examine the context. The Greeks were masters of geometry, astronomy, and mathematics. Think of Archimedes, Hipparchus, Ptolemy, Aristarchus. Philosophers and thinkers who studied the heavens, measured the earth, and theorized about planetary motion. But while they wrote about such things, we had no physical evidence that they built machines to model them. Until the Antikythera mechanism. It proves that ancient scientists didn't just understand abstract theory, they engineered it. They built machines to simulate the universe. One gear, one tooth, one dial at a time. And yet, we have only this one example, which begs the question, was it unique? Many historians believe the Antikythera mechanism was not the only one of its kind. Its complexity suggests generations of development. You don't go from zero to full planetary simulator in one try. Some believe it was crafted in Rhodes, where astronomer Hipparchus lived and taught. Others point to Archimedes, who is said to have built orreries and complex machines, none of which have survived. If true, this could mean that the ancient Mediterranean world possessed an entire lost lineage of technological craftsmanship. Machines, made of bronze and wood that decayed, burned, or were melted down for war. And this leads to the biggest mystery of all. Why didn't this technology survive? The fall of Rome, the burning of libraries, the shift from mechanical curiosity to theological orthodoxy, these may have contributed to the loss of ancient science. Knowledge that once turned with cogs and dials became ink on forgotten scrolls, misunderstood or suppressed. In the medieval world, mechanics was reborn, slowly, painfully, by artisans in cathedral towns who rediscovered the secrets of gearing. They believed they were inventing the future. They didn't know they were rediscovering the past. In recent years, the Antikythera mechanism has undergone even deeper analysis. A team of researchers at University College London used 3D X-ray tomography and imaging to reconstruct the entire gear structure. They confirmed that the mechanism used differential gearing, a principle not seen again until the 18th century. In 2021, scientists announced a new breakthrough. They had successfully recreated the entire front gear system, matching the ancient device's astronomical functions with stunning accuracy. And still, the work continues, because even now, parts of The mechanism remained unreadable, missing, or ambiguous. There could have been more dials, more functions, a second mechanism on the ship. An entire tradition of machines we've never found. Fringe theorists, of course, have jumped in. Some claim the Antikythera mechanism is evidence of ancient aliens. Others suggest it came from Atlantis, or a pre-Ice Age civilization destroyed in cataclysm. Mainstream science dismisses these ideas, pointing instead to Greek ingenuity, lost documents, and the fragility of bronze and parchment in a turbulent world. But still, why only one? Why has no other object from Greece, Rome, Egypt, or Babylon approached this level of mechanical complexity? What happened to the knowledge that built it? Did it vanish in fire, or did it vanish in neglect? Perhaps the most sobering possibility is this, that history is not a ladder, it is a wave. Knowledge rises, peaks, and sometimes disappears. What we take for granted, language, medicine, machines, can be lost in a generation. All it takes is war, famine, forgetting. The Antikythera mechanism is a monument not just to brilliance, but to fragility, to the human mind's capacity to reach for the cosmos and to forget what it once held in its hands. Today, the fragments of the device rest in the National Archaeological Museum in Athens, under glass, studied by physicists, engineers, and historians from around the world. Replicas have been built, simulations run, but the original, broken, silent, and stained with salt, still holds its secrets. Its gears do not turn, but its mystery still moves us. The riddle of the Dendera light, ancient Egypt's alleged electricity. In the temple of Hathor at Dendera, hidden in a crypt beneath centuries of stone, carved into walls once sacred to priests and pharaohs, lies one of the most controversial images in all of ancient Egypt. At first glance it seems decorative, yet intricate, a stylized relief, showing a lotus flower stemmed by a serpent, cradled in the arms of divine figures. But look again, and you'll see something strange. A large, oval-shaped object with a cable-like extension. A figure holding what appears to be a filament, and a resemblance that has fueled over half a century of speculation. To some, it is nothing less than a depiction of an electric light bulb. Welcome to the mystery of the Dendera light, an enigma carved in stone, argued over by scholars and theorists alike, and suspended between symbolism and forbidden knowledge. The image in question is located in the Hathor temple complex, part of the larger Dendera temple site in Upper Egypt. The temple itself dates primarily to the Ptolemaic and Roman periods, between the 2nd century BCE and the 1st century CE, but was built atop earlier structures dating back to the Old Kingdom. The controversial relief appears in a sealed crypt, a narrow, dark chamber beneath the temple floor, accessible only via steep stairs. This room was never meant for public viewing. It likely served as a ceremonial or symbolic chamber reserved for priestly rites. Inside, among other images, is the so-called Dendera light panel. It shows a lotus flower at the base, from which emerges a bulb-like enclosure. Inside the bulb is a serpent, stretching lengthwise. At the base, a jed pillar, symbol of stability, supports the structure. Figures around the device appear to be handling it, or gesturing toward it with reverence. To Egyptologists, it is a scene rich with symbolism. To others, it is a technological anomaly. Let's explore the mainstream interpretation first. Egyptologists argue that the relief depicts a mythological scene involving the creation of the world. The lotus represents the primordial flower from which the sun god Ra emerged. The serpent represents life force, or perhaps the god Harsomtus in the form of a snake. The enclosure is not a bulb, but a hazy womb of creation, the ether from which divine light or breath emerged. The Djed pillar, often interpreted as the backbone of the god Osiris, provides spiritual support and connection to the heavens. In this reading, the scene is cosmological, not technological, but this hasn't stopped alternative theorists from looking deeper. In the 1960s, Erich von Däniken and other authors of ancient astronaut theories proposed a bolder view, that the Dendera reliefs depicted actual electrical devices. In this theory, the bulb is a Crookes tube, an early prototype of the modern cathode ray tube. The serpent inside the bulb represents a plasma arc, or filament. The cable connecting to the Djed pillar is a power conduit, with the pillar functioning as an insulated power source. According to this view, the temple crypts were engine rooms, sealed to protect advanced devices handed down by an unknown or extraterrestrial civilization. Some even point to the absence of soot in many Egyptian tombs and temples as evidence that torches were not used, implying the use of a safer, smokeless light source. It's a compelling image, ancient engineers lighting the darkness with tools lost to history. But is it true? The soot argument, for one, is misleading. Recent studies show that Egyptians used vegetable oil lamps, often equipped with reflectors and chimneys, which minimize smoke. Furthermore, evidence of soot has been found, especially in poorly ventilated areas of less prominent tombs. Temples like Dendera were cleaned over centuries, and priests were meticulous in maintaining ritual purity. As for the electrical devices, there is no archaeological evidence of batteries, wires, filaments, or conductive materials in ancient Egypt. Proponents of the Baghdad battery, a clay pot with a metal rod and possible acidic residue, argue for ancient electrical experiments in Mesopotamia, but even that interpretation remains controversial, and at best reflects a primitive galvanic cell, not a light bulb. Still, the Dendera relief does not easily conform to other known Egyptian iconography. Unlike common creation scenes, the bulb is large, central, and textually silent. There are no hieroglyphs explaining the relief in detail. The object does not appear anywhere else in Egyptian art. It's a one-off, which opens the door to deeper, more symbolic possibilities. One compelling esoteric interpretation connects the Dendera relief to Kundalini energy, a concept from Indian spirituality describing the serpent energy that rises through the spine to awaken enlightenment. In this reading, the Djed pillar represents the human spinal column. The serpent is Kundalini energy. The bulb is the human skull or pineal gland, illuminated by awakening. The figures represent guardians of spiritual ascent, or the initiatory journey. This interpretation aligns with Hermetic traditions, many of which draw on Egyptian symbolism, and may have been preserved in the mystery schools of later antiquity. It positions the Dendera light not as a physical object, but as a spiritual technology, a device for inner transformation, not external illumination. There's also the architectural context to consider. The crypts of the Dendera temple are not tombs, but sacred spaces, likely used for ritual storage, religious enactments, and symbolic journeys. Their low ceilings, narrow stairways, and deep placement suggest a descent into the sacred, not for the body, but for the spirit. This matches the Egyptian theme of duality, of light and darkness, death and rebirth. Perhaps the Dendera light relief was meant to evoke divine illumination, not by electricity, but by spiritual awakening. But even this doesn't fully explain why it is so technically specific in its shape and layout. There is something about it, something visual, architectural, precise, that continues to defy easy dismissal. The controversy surrounding the Dendera light highlights a deeper issue in archaeology: the limits of interpretation. When ancient cultures leave no written explanation, we are left with symbols, open to cultural bias, projection, and imagination. Mainstream scholars warn against presentism, interpreting ancient artifacts through the lens of modern technology. But alternative theorists ask, what if modern technology is merely rediscovering ancient principles? Could the Dendera light be a memory, passed down in stone, of a time when light, real or symbolic, was born? A story told not in words, but in shape. Today, the Dendera temple still stands, one of the best preserved in Egypt. Its columns remain upright, its ceilings still depict zodiac constellations, its crypts are still open to the curious, and the relief, now famous, photographed and fiercely debated, still sits carved in limestone. It does not glow, but it illuminates something deeper: the human need to remember, to pass down truths in code, to light the dark with ideas that may flicker, fade, but never fully go out. The enigma of the Tărtăria tablets, Europe's forgotten first script. In a small village in Romania, near the banks of the Mureș River, a discovery was made in 1961 that quietly challenged the very timeline of human civilization. The site was called Tărtăria. There, buried in Neolithic soil, archaeologist Nicolae Vlasa uncovered a collection of ritual objects, clay figurines, burnt bones, and, most astonishing of all, 3 small clay tablets, etched with strange symbols. They were dated to around 5300 BCE. That's 2,000 years before the earliest Sumerian cuneiform. If authentic, the Tărtăria tablets are not just rare. They would be the oldest known writing system in the world. But what do they say? Who wrote them? And why does no one seem to agree if they're real? Let's begin with the tablets themselves. They're small, no bigger than a human palm. 2 are rectangular. The third is circular and pierced with a hole, possibly to be worn or hung. Each is incised with abstract symbols, crosshatches, chevrons, grids, stylized animals, trees, possibly even humanoid forms. One tablet is divided into 3 sections, each marked with a distinct grouping of signs. What makes the symbols so compelling is that they closely resemble characters found in later writing systems, particularly Sumerian proto-cuneiform, linear, and Vinci script artifacts found throughout the Balkans, and yet these tablets predate all of them by centuries. The Tărtăria tablets are commonly linked to the Vinci culture, a Neolithic society that flourished in the Danube River basin, modern-day Serbia, Romania, Bulgaria, and Hungary, from around 5700 to 4500 BCE. The Vinci people lived in sophisticated settlements with multi-room homes, ovens, pottery kilns, and carefully designed layouts. They produced intricate ceramics and stylized figurines, some of them wearing what appear to be headdresses or helmets. But most remarkably, Vinci sites across the Balkans contain hundreds of incised signs, not random scratches, but repeated symbols, patterns, arrangements. In other words, a symbolic system. Some archaeologists argue this is not true writing, merely proto-writing or decorative marks. But the consistency, organization, and frequency of these signs challenge that view, especially when we look at Tărtăria. The tablets were found in a ritual pit alongside the charred remains of bones and ceramic idols. The burial context suggests religious or ceremonial use, not mere decoration, and here begins the controversy. In order to analyze the tablets, archaeologist Vlasa baked them in a laboratory oven to harden the clay, destroying the ability to test for carbon-14 dating directly on the tablets themselves. This has led some critics to question their authenticity. Are they truly from the Neolithic layers in which they were found, or were they intrusive objects, inserted into older soil by mistake, or even as a hoax? Radiocarbon dating of the associated bones supports a date of around 5300 BCE, placing them in the early Vinça-Turdaș culture. But skeptics remain. After all, if the tablets are genuine, they rewrite the history of writing, and that is not an easy pill for academic orthodoxy to swallow. Mainstream archaeology still holds that writing began in Mesopotamia, with proto-cuneiform emerging around 3200 BCE, followed shortly by Egyptian hieroglyphs and Indus Valley script. To suggest that a Neolithic society in southeastern Europe invented symbolic communication 2,000 years earlier implies a level of cognitive and cultural complexity that doesn't fit the dominant narrative. But the tablets are not alone. Over 700 Vinça signs have been documented across hundreds of sites. The signs appear on pottery, figurines, tools, and even building walls. Many of these signs occur in repeated combinations, suggesting a syntax or structure. Some appear only in sacred contexts: graves, altars, temple platforms. Some scholars now refer to this system as the Old European script, a potential pre-Indo-European writing tradition that vanished before history began. But if it was real, what happened to it? Why did it disappear? One theory is that the Vinça culture practiced a ritualized symbolic language, used primarily in religious or elite contexts, not for everyday communication like trade or law. In this sense, it was more like a sacred code than a utilitarian script. Others suggest the symbols were mnemonic devices, tools for oral storytelling, myth transmission, or initiatory rites. Still others argue the symbols were abstract art, unrelated to language altogether. But the sheer volume of the signs, along with their geographic spread and contextual consistency, points toward a more organized, meaningful system, a lost alphabet, a forgotten voice. In recent years, computational linguists and pattern analysts have tried to decode the tablets. Using frequency analysis and syntactic modeling, some claim to detect repeating structures, possibly reflecting subject-object-verb orders or symbolic pairings. But without a Rosetta Stone, without a bilingual inscription or translation, these remain speculative. And there is a darker possibility that the script never had time to evolve. Around 4500 BCE, something changed in southeastern Europe. Settlements that had thrived for centuries were abandoned. Ceramics became cruder. Burial practices shifted. Some archaeologists believe the cause was climate-related: cooling temperatures, failed harvests, population pressures. Others point to the arrival of Indo-European pastoralists from the Eurasian steppe, riders with horses and metallurgy, who brought a new worldview, new language, a new social order. Whatever the cause, the Vinça culture disappeared, and with it perhaps the earliest experiment in symbolic writing. To this day, the Tărtăria tablets remain a scholarly outlier, rarely taught in mainstream history, occasionally dismissed, often ignored. Yet they continue to whisper. They whisper of a Neolithic world far more complex than we imagined. A world where art was language, where clay bore meaning, where writing may have begun, not in deserts, but in forests, and where the first sentence ever carved may now lie unread, lost in a museum drawer in Cluj, Bucharest, or Belgrade. The Tărtăria tablets are more than an archaeological curiosity. They are a reminder that history is not a straight line, that human intelligence, creativity, and expression have no single cradle, that perhaps writing was born more than once, in different places, under different skies, for different gods, and that in our rush to define the first, we may overlook the forgotten, the secret of the Temple Mount's missing cornerstone. In the heart of Jerusalem, on a plateau venerated by billions, lies one of the most contested, revered, and mysterious pieces of land on earth, the Temple Mount. To Jews, it is the site of the first and second temples, the sacred heart of ancient Israel, the spiritual axis of the world. To Muslims, it is Al-Haram al-Sharif, the noble sanctuary, home to the Dome of the Rock, and Al-Aqsa Mosque, the third holiest site in Islam. To Christians, it is the backdrop of Jesus' teachings, his challenge to the money changers, and the prophesied center of the world's end and rebirth. And yet, buried beneath the religious fervor, the stone pathways, and the politics of the present, lies an archaeological enigma that has puzzled scholars for centuries. The mystery of the missing cornerstone. What was it? Where is it? And could it unlock the truth about one of the greatest lost structures in human history, the Temple of Solomon? The idea of a cornerstone, a foundation stone laid first, marking the beginning of a sacred structure, is deeply symbolic in ancient traditions. In both Jewish and Christian texts, it represents strength, unity, and divine favor. Psalm 118 famously says, "The stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone." And yet, for the Temple Mount, arguably the most sacred construction site of the ancient world, the cornerstone itself is missing. There are massive stones, yes. The western wall, known in Hebrew as the Kotel, is built of Herodian blocks, each weighing 2 to 50 tons, some as long as 13 meters. But none of these stones bear the distinct markings, inscriptions, or placement traditionally associated with a cornerstone. According to ancient tradition, the cornerstone of Solomon's temple was not just a structural element, it was a ritual artifact, and its absence has given rise to mystery and myth. Let's return to the origins. According to the Hebrew Bible, King Solomon built the first temple around 957 BCE on land purchased by his father, King David, on Mount Moriah, the site where Abraham is said to have prepared to sacrifice his son. The temple was a house for the Ark of the Covenant, the divine throne of the invisible God. The construction was legendary: cedar from Lebanon, gold from Ophir, sacred measurements divinely ordained. But the cornerstone, tradition says, came from God himself, either placed by angelic hands or discovered by workers as a perfect, uncut stone. The Talmud and Midrashic texts make cryptic references to a foundation stone, the Even HaShetia, placed in the Holy of Holies, atop which the Ark would rest. This stone was believed to seal the abyss, to cap the primordial chaos at the center of the earth. Over time, the Shetia stone became associated with both creation and containment, a cosmic plug holding back the floodwaters of chaos. It is, some say, the true cornerstone, not at the base of the temple's outer walls, but at its very heart. So where is it? According to Islamic tradition, the Dome of the Rock, built in 691 CE by the Umayyad Caliph Abd al-Malik, enshrines this exact stone. Beneath the golden dome lies a limestone outcropping, exposed to the air, an irregular ancient stone known as the Saqqara. This stone is held sacred in Islam as the site of Muhammad's night journey, where the Prophet is said to have ascended to heaven. But Jewish sources long identified this very stone as the foundation of the world, the place where creation began. Is the Saqqara the Shetiyah stone? Many believe so. Yet, despite its sanctity, no official archaeological excavation has ever been allowed beneath the dome of the rock, due to the extreme political and religious sensitivity of the site. What lies beneath it, if anything, remains unknown. And therein lies the problem. Without excavation, we cannot know whether this stone is natural bedrock, a placed monolith, or something far older than either tradition admits. Some theories suggest that the true cornerstone, the first laid block of Solomon's temple, was not beneath the Holy of Holies, but located at the base of the Temple Mount's retaining walls. In Haï, 1999, during controversial construction work by the Waqf near the Solomon Stables area, bulldozers inadvertently exposed underground chambers and large blocks. Some of these blocks showed signs of First Temple period masonry, a rare find, but the area was quickly filled in, and access has since been restricted. Rumors persist of an unusual stone unearthed during this operation, larger than the rest, uncut, with possible Hebrew characters or markings, but no photographs, no inscriptions, no documentation has surfaced. Is this conspiracy or simply lost opportunity? Other scholars point to a more symbolic disappearance. The missing cornerstone, they say, represents not a literal rock, but the lost unity of humanity with the divine. In Jewish mysticism, the destruction of the first and second temples by the Babylonians in 586 BCE and the Romans in 70 CE represents the exile of Shekinah, the divine presence. The cornerstone, in this interpretation, is not a physical stone, but the presence of God on earth. Its absence is spiritual. And yet, the physical mystery persists. Where is the first stone? Was it swallowed by time, removed, hidden, or is it still there, beneath the Temple Mount, waiting? Adding to the intrigue is the recurring theme of a rejected stone in religious texts. In both Judaism and Christianity, the idea that the most important stone was overlooked, cast aside, or lost is deeply woven into prophetic literature. In the Book of Zechariah, the prophet speaks of a stone with 7 eyes laid before Joshua. In the Book of Acts, Peter quotes the psalmist, "The stone you builders rejected has become the cornerstone." To early Christians, this verse referred to Jesus himself, rejected by men but exalted by God. In this view, the missing cornerstone is both historical and messianic. Its reappearance would herald the return of divine presence, the rebirth of the temple, and the restoration of cosmic order. Some Jewish traditions echo this idea, linking the rebuilding of the Third Temple to the discovery of the lost cornerstone, the return of the Ark, or the descent of the Shekinah. And so, the stone becomes a prophecy, a hidden axis of time. In recent years, technological advances have allowed archaeologists to use ground-penetrating radar, thermal imaging, and non-invasive scanning of subterranean areas near the Temple Mount. Some scans suggest the presence of hollow chambers, ancient voids, or unexplored tunnels beneath the surface, but access remains highly restricted. Excavating the site risks not just political chaos, but religious war, For now, the Temple Mount remains a place of shared memory and mutual exclusion. Each tradition sees it as sacred, and each guards its mystery. The missing cornerstone of the Temple Mount is not just a question of architecture, it is a question of truth, inheritance, and identity. It asks us to consider how we remember the past and how we interpret silence. Is the stone gone, or was it never there? Is it a relic to be found, or a mystery to be lived? Perhaps the answer lies not in stone, but in intention, because sometimes the greatest truths in history are not built on what was found, but on what is still missing. The unfinished obelisk, Egypt's monument to ambition and mystery. In the sun-scorched granite quarries of Aswan, far from the towering temples of Karnak and the eternal gaze of the pyramids, lies a monument unlike any other in Egypt. It was never raised, it was never inscribed, it was never completed, and yet it is one of the largest pieces of stone ever carved by human hands. This is the unfinished obelisk, a 1,200-ton giant still fused to the bedrock from which it was born. Nearly 137 feet long, it would have been the tallest obelisk in ancient Egypt had it stood, but it cracked, and so it was abandoned, frozen in its moment of failure. Or was it? Because the mystery of the unfinished obelisk is not just how it broke, but how it was ever possible at all. Let's start with the basics. The obelisk lies in a quarry just outside Aswan, the ancient city of Suenet, located near Egypt's southern border with Nubia. This region was prized for its red granite, a dense, beautiful stone used in statues, temples, sarcophagi, and obelisks. The pharaohs came here to quarry eternity itself. The unfinished obelisk is believed to have been commissioned by Hatshepsut, one of Egypt's few female pharaohs, who ruled in the 15th century BCE during the New Kingdom's 18th dynasty. She was known for grand monuments, especially obelisks, which she erected at Karnak to honor the god Amun. This one would have dwarfed them all. But somewhere in the process of carving, a crack appeared near its base. Fatal, irreversible. The obelisk could not be raised, and so the workers left it. Still, attached to the bedrock, half-carved, it remains there today, a monument to both Egyptian ambition and the limits of human control. But here's the enigma. How did they plan to move it? The unfinished obelisk is larger than any successfully raised monolith in Egypt. To carve it, workers had to chisel down into solid granite, creating a trench around its edges. To do this, they used dolerite pounders, hard stones used to chip away at granite, millimeter by millimeter. We can still see the chisel marks today, deep, rhythmic scars in the quarry wall, like fossilized effort. But even if they finished carving it, how would they lift it? How would they transport it across the Nile, hundreds of kilometers north to its final destination? How would they stand it upright? A task modern cranes would find daunting, and perhaps most mysteriously, why build it this big? Let's explore the theories. The transportation hypothesis. Some Egyptologists believe the obelisk would have been floated down the Nile on a custom-built barge, possibly stabilized by timber scaffolding and filled with sand ballast. The carving process would involve undercutting the base until only a few contact points remained, then breaking the obelisk free with levers and wedges. It would then be slid onto wooden rollers, dragged by hundreds of laborers, and moved to the riverbank. From there, it could be floated downstream to Luxor or Karnak, where it would be raised with ramp systems, sand pits, and carefully calibrated leverage. It's theoretically possible, but has never been replicated at this scale. The largest successfully erected obelisks, like those at Karnak or Rome, are shorter, lighter, and still required astonishing engineering. No, Egyptian text explains the process in detail. We are left with fragments of logic and guesswork. The symbolic obelisk theory. Some researchers propose the obelisk was never meant to be moved. Instead, it was intended as a symbolic project, a statement of imperial might at the source of the stone itself. In this view, Hatshepsut or her successors may have commissioned it as a sacred object to remain in the quarry, perhaps to honor the gods of the south or to symbolize the divine source of stone and strength. But if so, why leave it unfinished? Why allow a crack to ruin its symmetry? Why abandon it without inscription or ceremony? Nothing in the Egyptian mindset suggests tolerance for imperfection, especially on a project so grand. The simplest answer is still, it broke, and it was no longer worthy of the gods. The lost technology hypothesis. Some fringe theorists suggest that the scale of the unfinished obelisk implies techniques we no longer understand. How could Bronze Age workers have carved such precise lines into granite using only dolerite balls? How did they measure, align, and level such a massive monolith with no lasers, no cranes, no digital modeling? And what about the possibility that other unfinished megaliths, like Baalbek in Lebanon or the trilithons of Aswan itself, suggest a shared legacy of high engineering knowledge later forgotten? Mainstream scholars disagree. They point to Egypt's meticulous workforce organization, priestly planning, and centuries of quarrying tradition. The technology may not have been high, but the systems were. Still, the question persists. If they were able to build it, why did they fail this time? What changed? Was it a miscalculation or something more? There's also a mystical angle to the obelisk. In Egyptian theology, obelisks were not just monuments. They were petrified sunbeams, sacred pylons linking earth and sky, embodying the Benben stone from Heliopolitan creation myths, upon which the sun first rose. The sharp tip, originally covered in electrum, a gold-silver alloy, would catch the morning sun and reflect its rays back to the gods. Erecting an obelisk was a cosmic act, a renewal of harmony between gods and kings. To fail at such an act may have had spiritual consequences. Perhaps the crack was not just a structural flaw. Perhaps it was seen as an omen, a sign that the gods had withdrawn favor. A message carved by accident into ambition. In recent years, archaeologists have returned to the Aswan quarries to better understand the methods used. Laser scanning, 3D modeling, and surface analysis have revealed tool marks, quarry paths, and even worker graffiti, etchings left behind by teams that labored in the heat of Upper Egypt. One inscription reads, "I, Nebamun, was here. We worked for Amun," a glimpse of the real people behind the grandeur. They were not magicians. They were not aliens. They were artisans, tired, skilled, devoted. They believed they were building something divine, and even in failure, they created a mystery that endures. The unfinished obelisk lies exposed to the sky today, its base still rooted in granite, its bulk baking in the sun, its cracks visible, unhealed. It is not a ruin. It is a process, frozen in time, a snapshot of ambition, arrested mid-stroke. It allows us to see how monuments begin, not just how they end, and perhaps, in that, it teaches something greater than success. It teaches the beauty of attempting the impossible, even when it doesn't work. Especially then,